Everybody, thank you again for joining me on another live. And so just we'll dive right in here, let you guys know what this is all about. I've been doing these for a couple weeks now, but just got to set the right expectation, right? And so basically, I'm here to talk about the evidence for Christianity. Non-Christians and doubting Christians are the ones who are welcome to come. So that answers the question right there. Eric, I'm a Christian. Am I allowed to join? Yes, you absolutely are allowed to join. If you are a non-Christian, you are also welcome to join. There is a pinned comment in the live chat at the top that you would just click on to join. Now, what kind of topics am I going to go over? Well, I'm not the jack of all trades apologist, just to be honest with you. And so, but I'm talking about evidence for Christianity. I am a dyed-in-the-wool, evil evidentialist, the anti-presuppositionalist, those dang Calvinists and their presuppositionalism, and I guess a few ortho bros too. No, I'm just kidding. But for real, I just go over the evidence. And so talk to me about resurrection of Jesus, okay? Did Jesus claim to be God? Did Paul, is he a liar? Is he crazy? Or was he really apostle? Was he genuine? Did he really see the risen Jesus? Was he really sent by the risen Jesus? And so I know a lot of Muslims have hangups about that, but it's not just Muslims, it's all kinds of people, liberal Christians, quote unquote Christians, and all kinds of other people do not like Paul. And so do miracles happen today? And so that's something that I'm more than happy to talk about. It's one of my favorite topics because I believe miracles are something that still happen right now. God wasn't just helpful 2,000 years ago. He's still busy doing things and making himself known. And then messianic prophecy, did Jesus fulfill it? And so any of those 5 topics, those I think represent the 5 strongest lines of evidence that all converge together that point to one thing, and that's Christianity is true. And if Christianity is true, then you should believe it because everybody should believe what's true, right? And so it's as simple as that. And so I'll have to reset the expectation a few times midstream. I'm still trying to kind of figure out a smooth way to do this because it's kind of broad, like these are 5 different topics, and I've tried to narrow it down to just like one topic per stream and debate that. And then like nobody shows up. And so I figured maybe if I make it a little more catch-all, more people will show up. So anyways, we'll jump in. I do got a guest waiting real quick though. Just run through some comments, just say hi to some folks that are here. Man, Deba Top, here again. Thank you, bro. Testify, Riz, Skibbity Sigma 67. Okay, no, never 67. I don't understand the kids. I don't understand the kids. I work with elementary kids, and I ask them, I'm like, what does that even mean? And they can never tell me. And so I'm like, I can't go down this many levels of brain rot. Jesus is God. Amen. 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 Sentinel Apologetics, a very excellent channel. Rob, you guys probably know Rob. And so thanks for stopping by, Rob. Love the channel. Keep up the good work. He has really been killing it a lot in his debates with Muslims. And so be sure to check out Sentinel Apologetics, guys. Ronan Jax, what is this? As someone who loves Christian culture, I find it cringe when theists try to prove their faith is true. It's called faith for a reason because you don't know. Oh no. We got a Richard Dawkins definition of faith here. This is bad. Do we tell them? That's not what faith is. That's not what Christians see faith as. That's rough, man. That's rough. And so let's just think about it for just a second. Just run through some quick scriptures, and then I do have some guests, so I'll bring them up here soon. One second here. I have an article here that I pulled up of mine, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go instead to the Bible. When you're critiquing Christianity, you probably should find out what Christians actually believe. This is Acts 1:3. After his suffering, referring to Jesus, Jesus, presented himself and gave them many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke to them about the kingdom of God. And so Jesus himself, the author and the finisher of our faith, gave his own apostles many, many, many convincing proofs. And you know what they did with those convincing proofs? They tried to convince others of those convincing proofs. Here's just an example. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead, saying, "This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah." And so he was trying to prove, he was trying to argue with them. He was trying to debate with them even. And so let's look at just one more, and then I'll keep going on here to got a few guests waiting. Paul entered the synagogue and spoke boldly there for 3 months, arguing persuasively about the kingdom of God. And then he had daily discussions in the lecture hall of Tyrannus for a period of 2 years. He's reasoning, he's arguing, he's showing them evidence, right? What does Paul talk about when he's in front of Agrippa? He talks about the resurrection. He talks about his own experience, his own testimony, what he saw, and then testimony of others. And he says, I'm pretty convinced that you know that none of this was done in a corner. He appeals to public proofs, which would be messianic prophecy, the resurrection, and his own personal testimony. And so cringe, no, this is, you don't, bro, Ronan Jacks, if you love Christian culture, try to understand Christian culture. Christian culture values evidence because Jesus valued evidence. And so, yeah. Ricky says, I think if you're willing to believe Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great lived and were kings, and Jesus lived and died and resurrected, history requires faith. If you really think about it, that's very true. That's very true. Anything in historical history, you're going to have to make arguments. You're going to have to present evidence and infer to the best explanation. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4. It's not mathematical. It's not a logical proof. It is a historical proof and an inference to the best explanation. And so, yes, that's a good comment for sure. All right. That's probably good for now. That's probably good for now. Oh, one quick one here I saw just to answer somebody's question because it was a good question. I'm a Gnostic. Should I call in? If you want to, bro. Gnostics are welcome. That would count as a non-Christian. Real quick super chat, and then we'll jump in. God bless, man. Love your videos. Would you do another in-depth video of Daniel 9 again? Yeah, sure. I would like to work on that. I've been working on this whole series of prophecy. If some of you guys might seen with the shorts, and some of you might seen with the recent videos. And so Daniel 9 is definitely on my radar. And so I will be happy to work on a video on that. I'm just not sure when at the moment. All right. Got a couple guests backstage. And so Lance, what's up, man?
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's actually kind of ironic because I've been kind of wrestling with this all day, and then I saw your stream. I'm like, this is a blessing from God right here. So I've been wrestling with Paul and Jesus, if they contradict. I mentioned it earlier in the chat. I came across this article of like 25 times when they seemingly contradict, the two of them. So, okay. I mean, I don't really know how you want to do this. If you just want to go through each one, I mean, I could send you the article.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I'm going to go through 25 different points. Maybe you could pick like one or a handful of the ones that bother you the most, perhaps, or.
Well, the one that kind of wrestles me, I just can't understand like the reconciliation is Romans 14:9, where Paul says, "For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and living." Mm-hmm. And then Jesus says in Luke 20 verse 38, now he is not God of the dead but of the living. So how would you reconcile those?
He's not the God of the dead of the living, but he would be. Well, the living and the dead, when Paul's referring to the living and the dead, I would take it that he's, these are two completely different contexts. So let's actually look at Luke chapter 20. And so I can answer the question, but I think the more important part is, do we know that Paul was approved of by the apostles? Because they're not going to allow somebody like in their fold who was preaching a completely different message, right? And so I think the more important question is, do we have good historical evidence that like Paul actually did see the risen Jesus and that he was accepted by the apostles? And so we can go over this one, and then if you're interested in that, I can show you some sort of evidence on that in particular. And so I'm looking at it here. Let me pull up the screen and give some context here. All right. So the context is they're he's basically kind of pitting. Oh, I thought I shared the screen. I guess I didn't. There we go. The context is, as some of you guys probably already know, is he's asking the Sadducees say there's no resurrection, right? And
Right.
it says, teacher, they said, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves his wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. And there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second, and then the third married her. And in the same way, 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. Now, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her? Jesus replied, people of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given into marriage, and they can no longer die, for they are like the angels, right? And so at the resurrection, right, there is no more death. Obviously, there is no more procreation, there is no more marriage, any of that kind of stuff. They are God's
Mm-hmm.
children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed the dead rise, for he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. And so he's basically saying that these guys, they passed on, right? They go to some sort of intermediate state, some sort of, I don't know, Abraham's bosom, heaven, whatever you want to call it, paradise, whatever you want to call it. And so now Paul is not saying, like, he's not disagreeing with Jesus here, because Paul, of his own death, he says, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is better by far, right? And so he's saying that if he dies, if he leaves this particular his body, right, he goes and he departs and he is with Christ. He says something really similar in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He says, now in this earthly tent we live in is destroyed. We have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built with human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, because when we are clothed, we will be found naked. For while we are in this tent, we groan and are burdened, because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, so that what mortal might be swallowed up by life. Now, the one who fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as his deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in this body, we are away from the Lord, for we live by faith and not by sight. For we were confident to say that we would prefer to be away from the body and to be at home with the Lord. And so Paul's not disagreeing with Jesus that, like, when you're dead, the Sadducees, what was their belief? They only believed that you once you were dead, you're dead, right? And so the Pharisees believed in probably some sort of intermediate state, and they definitely believed in the resurrection, right? The Sadducees only considered the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, as the only authoritative scripture, which doesn't really
Right.
give you a picture of resurrection. However, in the prophets like Isaiah 26:14, Daniel 12:1-3, and other places, Ezekiel 37, they are hinting, and you see it in intertestamental books too. There's this idea of there's going to be a resurrection of the flesh. And then Jesus even talks about, like, there's an intermediate state when he talks about, like, for instance, the rich man and Lazarus, right? Paul, apparently, from these scriptures too, he believes that if he dies, he's going to be present with Christ. And so when he says he's not he's the God of the Jesus is Lord over the dead and the living, he's referring to those people who are in that intermediate state, as far as like Christians who have gone on to be with Christ. Now, he still considers them to be living, because he flat out says that he's going to be living after he dies. And so to me, this just misunderstands the context. Jesus is basically showing Sadducees that, as it says in another version, another gospel, I think it's Matthew's, where he says, you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. He says, you're quite wrong, because he's refuting Sadducees, right? And he's saying, no, there is life after death, right? And so Paul, who was a Pharisee and is talking to Christians in Rome, is basically just giving this kind of broad outline of, like, hey, whether you're dead or whether you're alive, Jesus is Lord, right? And so, and
Right.
he's Lord over all. And so I find that to be incredibly weak. I thought you were going to give me, like, like, well, Jesus said the law will be fulfilled, and Paul says, the law is bad and we're free from the law and all that other kind of stuff. That's the usual one that you hear. So, anyways,
Well,
does that make
it's
sense?
actually interesting because I mean that the same article I came across has those very same
Yeah,
verses,
I'm
but I
sure it
saw your
does.
videos on them. I'm like, okay, well that makes sense what Paul
Okay.
was talking about versus Jesus. Plus, they also say the same thing. There are also times when Paul talks about the importance of the law, and Jesus talks about only believing in Him.
Mhm.
And well, not only, but he talks about belief and whatnot. Because from what I've seen, people will say, well, Paul is saying just have faith, while Jesus is saying not everyone who says Lord will come into heaven or whatever. But they're really saying the same thing. They're just wording it differently because they have a different audience. So I hope does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, well, even at the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, one way you could look at it is if the Sermon on the Mount is basically Jesus taking the law and then amplifying it to like a
Right.
high level, right? Of
Yeah.
like if you think adultery is bad, I'm telling you not even look at a one with lust. If you think
Exactly.
murder is bad, I'm telling you like if you even so much as hate your brother, you're as bad as a murderer, and so on and so on. And when you read the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, wow, this is like the greatest, most moral, ethical teaching I've probably ever heard. And also,
Right.
you ought to probably feel hopeless that your good works, your good efforts, and all of the things that you can do are just never going to be good enough in order for you to be accepted. And so, and I think Jesus in that kind of context is kind of he's increasing the stringent demands of the law
Right.
to show like how hopeless that it really is, that none of you could ever possibly meet it. But then he's still dropping hints throughout the Gospels, and we especially see it in like the Gospel of John, for example, where he's basically like, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. And how do they come to him after even the feeding of the 5,000? How do we do the works? How do we do the works of God? And he's like, the works of God are this: believe in him whom he sent, right? And he's
Right.
saying that's the way to eternal life. And so I don't think that there's a contradiction, but I think that there is different audiences. Like I said, I think the more important question, the biggest question, is, was Paul really accepted by the Jerusalem apostles? Because why would they accept somebody who's just preaching a completely false doctrine? And I think the book of Acts, which is like thoroughly historical, gives us like tons and tons of warrant to believe that yes, Paul was accepted. Yes, Paul was a true apostle. Yes, Paul really genuinely did work miracles and all of those kind of things. And he was even commissioned by the apostles to preach to the Gentiles and give them the kind of the results of what they decided at the Jerusalem Council, and on it goes. And so that to me is kind of the more interesting point, than anything else. Because if that's true, then no matter what we think about these particular contradictions, unless they're just flat out completely contradictory, there's no way of reconciling them at all. Then that would be a problem. But like, no, there are reasonable harmonizations, and we have a mountain of evidence that acts as a reliable count, which includes a lot about the Apostle Paul, preaching and teaching, seeing Jesus, and working miracles and being accepted by the apostles.
Right. Well, I've never really had an issue with accepting Paul. It's just a lot of his some of his writing. Not most of them are in complete harmony with Christ. You
Mhm.
did a video on that, and it like you listed like 40 to 50, maybe I don't know if it's that much, but a whole bunch of where
It's
they're
like 30
completely in
something, yeah.
continuity.
Mhm.
So, and I mean, as a Catholic, I've read a lot of the early fathers of the church. Are you still there?
Yeah, my camera just cut out. I
Oh,
don't know
okay.
what's going on. Hopefully it is working again here.
But anyway,
Ooh.
and the fathers universally accepted Paul too. Irenaeus, Ignatius quotes him hundreds of
There's
times.
not a hint or whiff
Yeah,
of anything.
and
They
that,
they
that's something
they
I've kind of
they
figured out. It's like,
praise him.
well, if Paul was such an antithesis to Jesus, the disciples would have noticed it and they would have
Right,
commented on it.
exactly.
And so, I
And
mean,
we would see
yeah,
something in the fathers about it. And so yeah, it's the best that people can do, like I said, is make these goofy lists. And I don't think that the one that you gave is a particularly strong one. And it sounds like the other stuff is kind of the videos that I've made have been helpful to you. So
yeah.
hopefully that answers the question. Did you have anything else or?
Um, I mean, the more I think about this, like, or read this list, these are honestly really reconcilable.
Mhm.
Like he brings up like Matthew 23:9, call no man your father on earth. And then he brings
Oh,
up, you
yeah.
know, of course as a Catholic I hear that all the time, but
Yeah, I'm
um
sure you do.
which
Ah,
of course that's not at all what Jesus is saying.
right.
I guess that's kind of it. I mean, I'll still read more because obviously you don't have time, which is makes sense, but that was the one that really struck out to me. I don't know why it just did,
Yeah. Tell you what,
but
send that article to me via email, and maybe it'll be like some good video fodder for me. So it's
okay.
testifyapologetics@gmail.com.
All
Again,
right, for sure.
testifyapologetics@gmail.com. And maybe I could go through, one by one and make some shorts on it, or if they're any good, or maybe a longer video on it or something like that. Because I'm always looking for objections, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it sounds like you don't have a problem accepting that Acts is historical,
Right.
which I
I
think is the
don't.
big thing. Yeah, and then you've already seen other videos like Paul and the Law and different things like that. I did a whole series a few months ago on that.
Yeah.
So cool, man.
The article's done by Edgar Jones. Does that sound familiar to
I'm
you?
not familiar with him. No, I never heard of
No.
him. Yep.
It's interesting because a lot of the these kind of Jewish Christians that they still follow the Torah and they reject Paul. It's a
Mhm.
lot of these Christians and not even Muslims. I'm not even coming into contact with them regarding Paul.
Yeah.
It's these Jewish Christians that reject Paul and they still follow the Torah and whatever.
Yeah,
So
those would be your kind of modern day. Oh, what's the name of that heresy? All of a sudden, I'm totally forgetting
is
it.
it a Judaizers? Is that it?
No, kind of. It's the ones that the Muslims like to claim. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on it right at the moment. Ebionites. Yeah, they're kind of like your modern day
Okay.
Ebionites. Yeah, who like accept basically kind of a mangled version of Matthew's gospel and preach that Jesus was the Son of God. And they kind of had some Gnostic ideas too, though, but they were big time on keeping the law, and they totally rejected Paul, and they didn't think Jesus was divine in any sense. A lot of Muslims like to try to argue that they're like the prototypes of like the early Muslims that were like the true followers of Jesus. But the
Hmm.
problem is that sect died out way before Muhammad ever became popular, and the Quran in Surah 61:14 and 355 basically promises that Jesus's followers will be dominant until the day of resurrection. These guys just completely like fall off and are only mentioned in the church fathers like a little bit, and also have beliefs that they would never accept, like the crucifixion of Jesus. They reject the virgin birth, which Muslims definitely accept, and so on and so forth. So Rob says
Right.
too, he would also say that Romans 14:9 is an echo of Revelation 1:18 in the sense that there is no Old Testament instance of a true descent to and return to the underworld by a living human being. Jesus was the only one. And so, yeah, it does mention that. You also see that in First Peter chapter 3, where it talks about that Jesus descended and he went and preached to the spirits in prison and different things like that. And so I know Michael Heiser, I'm sure Rob will appreciate that, has some materials on that. And so you can kind of check that out. And so he's just basically saying that Jesus was kind of the first to descend and return to the underworld. And so maybe that kind of partially answers the so-called contradiction there. He also adds, just real quick, Paul's point is that everybody goes to Sheol because everybody dies, but once you're there in the place of the dead, nobody gets out. But there's hope that you will get out on the last day, which would, of course, be the resurrection. So, anyways, hope that helps. There's a couple
Sure
answers there.
does.
All right.
I
Well,
appreciate it.
awesome, Lance. Thanks so much for joining, man. I appreciate it.
And I will certainly send you that article for sure
Yeah,
because
do it.
I would love for you to do some shorts on that because
Yeah.
I think they'd be worth it.
Yeah, there's a lot of Paul hate that goes out there, and I am like the apologist,
The
lame pun intended.
apologist.
Yeah, but I just find Paul to be super fascinating, and there's so much good
Right.
historical and theological stuff in there to talk about. So awesome, man. Thanks for joining.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. All right, all right. So just real quick reminder, guys. What are the topics that we are talking about? Just as you see at the bottom of the screen, just going to set this expectation between every single call. And so the topics, basically, everybody should be a Christian. Why? because there are 5 lines of evidence that converge, that all point in the same direction, that show us that Christianity is true. And what are those 5 lines of evidence? The resurrection of Jesus. If Jesus rose from the dead, then he probably is who he actually claimed to be. Who did he claim to be? Well, he claimed to be the Messiah, but he went beyond that. He also claimed to be God. And I know there's some people who have a bone to pick with that. You have Muslims that have a bone to pick with that. You have skeptics, atheists who have a bone to pick with that. You have all kinds of people, even cultists, but no, Jesus claimed to be God. So I'm willing to talk about that. Paul is an apostle. We kind of touched on that. Was Paul a genuine apostle? Was he imagining things that weren't really there? Did he try to hijack Christianity? Was he a liar? All of those kind of things. And so happy to discuss that. If you think that and want to challenge me on that, I will tell you why you are wrong. And then miracles happen today. I think it's a very underutilized argument. Not one you see in a lot of apologetics, but I would argue that miracles are still something that happen in the modern day and messianic prophecy. And so if you want to talk about why Jesus is the prophesied Messiah, I will definitely be willing to do that as well. And so, Jason, you're on the stage. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, boss?
Just keeping it gangster.
Yeah, first time caller. Yeah, I wanted your opinions on some things.
Is it on the 5 topics?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No,
yeah, my wife is still a believer, hardcore believer, but I'm no longer in the faith.
Okay.
Theology and especially Christianity hold my attention, and I have issues with the resurrection. I have issues with the claim that Jesus is God. I don't see miracles happening today, and a lot of this stems, like my loss of faith came from the Bible. Okay. Reading it, studying it, looking at the history, just looking at the evidence and proof, and I just don't see it. I don't believe it.
Okay. Out of those 5, which one do you want to talk about the most? Because you mentioned resurrection, you mentioned Jesus never claimed to be God, and you mentioned that you don't see miracles happening today. And so take a pick. We could start somewhere, and where we end up, yea, no man knoweth.
So yeah, I think Jesus claimed to be God in the Bible roughly 80 times.
Mm-hmm.
The issue I have with it is the further back you go in the Gospels, it's not mentioned a whole bunch, or Christ doesn't seem to just outright say, I am God or Son of Man, etc.
Okay. Does he have to use the exact words in order for us to know?
I think that if we have a creator that inspires the Bible as we see it today, it should be written in a way that his creation could easily be able to discern.
What about his audience, like his original audience? If he said it in a way that his original audience would understand, would that work?
I mean, we can go with that. Sure. I'll grant you that.
Okay, sure. Well, let me show you a few things. Now, I'm the slides guy, so I'm just sorry in advance, dude. But when you're dealing with history, there's a lot of facts. You know what I'm saying? And so I have my little visuals to keep me on point. At any point, within reason, feel free to interrupt, challenge. Once I've made a point, and if you think that it's off, then give me your pushback. Okay. And so I'll give you some reasons why I think Jesus, to his Jewish audience, because I think what you probably want to say is that, well, yeah, in John's gospel, he makes it super clear he's God, right? I am the Father of one. Before Abraham, I am. He that has seen me has seen the Father, right? And so, but in the earlier gospels, like say Mark's gospel, which is, scholars mostly think that Mark is the one that came first, or even Matthew and Luke. It's like he's not making these bold statements to deity. Is that
John?
Is that kind of
John
your
is like
argument?
A whole different gospel.
Sure, we could talk about the historical reliability of John too. I got no problem with that. So, no, these are fair points, and I appreciate you bringing them up. And so, there's 2 different ways that we could kind of handle this. And I just did a live stream, like really in depth for the audience, if they want to go back and watch that, and if you want to go back and watch it, you can, I'll give you kind of a taste, but I went through like an hour and a half of why Jesus claimed to be God in both gospels and why John is a historical document. We could talk about both points if you want to. So let's first touch on Jesus claiming to be God in the synoptics. Okay. So one way that Jesus does that, and this might seem like a side journey, but just bear with me for a minute, is we have to consider that Jesus is talking to a Jewish audience. And to a Jewish audience, family was very sacred, right? There's the whole Exodus 20:12, right? It's one of the 10 commandments. Honor thy father and thy mother, right? So to dishonor parents is an equivalent to dishonoring God, right? This command ranked just under the worship of God himself. Now, we actually have Jewish sources on family honor. I'm sure you've probably heard of Philo, the Jewish philosopher who lived in Egypt. He says in one of his in Special Laws, one of his works, the duty of honoring parents stands on the borderline between the human and the divine. The Jewish historian Josephus says, honor to parents, honor to parents, the law ranks second only to honor to God, right? So in Jewish thought, honoring parents was only second to God. It's pretty clear from these sources, right? And Josephus is a first century source, obviously. But Jesus, in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, and we also see this in Luke 14:26. He says that if you love father or mother more than me, you are not worthy of me. So Jesus himself, right here, to his Jewish audience, moves devotion to himself above the fifth commandment. This devotion would have been seen as devotion owed to God alone. He reiterates this in Matthew chapter 8, verse 21 through 22. There's a man that comes to him and says, hey, Lord, I'll follow you wherever you want me to follow you. Right. But first, let me bury my father. Right. And some people think he's not saying like his dad is dead and he's going to bury him. Like, no, he's going to stick with his dad for a little bit. He's elderly. He's going to die. Then he's going to bury him. OK. Jesus turns to the guy and says, listen, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Right. We see in the intertestamental books like Tobit and Sirach that burying parents was a Torah-based obligation. Like, this is something you have to do. If you're a good Jew, you take care of your family in their elderly years, and you certainly make sure they get a proper burial, right? But here we see Jesus placing discipleship to himself above the sacred law. So Jesus takes God's place in this. The Decalogue and the Shema were recited daily. Love God, honor your parents. We see this in the Sibylline Oracles, which again is a first century intertestamental kind of period book, right? That the Jews prayed first to God and then they spoke blessings to their parents. But Jesus is centering that devotion on himself. You have a New Testament scholar, Martin Hengel, says that Jesus dares to act as God himself, where the law prescribed dedication to God. He demanded dedication to himself. Craig Keener says that no Jewish teacher would speak of hating one's parents by comparison. God alone was worthy of that role. So this is just one clue. Okay, bear in mind, I'm not saying this is like the end all be all. It's a bit of a cumulative case, but this is one powerful point, I think, where Jesus is very clearly commanding a devotion and placing himself above the fifth commandment, which only makes sense if he's claiming to be God. Does that make sense?
No, and it does. I'm a 40-year-old college student trying to finish a degree, so these slides are completely appropriate. What comes to mind when you share this is, and this is all in good faith. Matthew was written, roughly 70, 80 AD?
Well, there's disagreement about dating. You
Right.
even have liberal scholars like James Crossley and others that would date Mark in the 40s and Matthew a bit earlier than that. There's good reasons to think that the temple was still standing. The way that he talks about certain laws that would have been completely oblivious to some of his readers, some Jewish laws like, go leave your offering at the temple and be reconciled and all this other stuff, like don't, and so there's a number of reasons that. So, but even then, even if you want to say 85, I can grant you that for the sake of argument.
So the reason I was saying that's like truth matters the most to me. It's debilitating, but when we're talking about Jesus as God and how it evolves over the Gospels, we have to start with what the Gospels are. And I'm not going to belittle your intelligence when it comes to all of this. I'm assuming you know most of this. But what I struggle with is we don't actually have what I think historians, and I want to try to be very specific with my words.
Sure.
This is such a big claim. I mean, it's the biggest one, right? I think the biggest question we can ask ourselves is, where does this all start? I'm a scientist. I use the tool of science in my career. And when an idea or a thought comes up, there's a process to be able to delineate what's true and what's not. And then we pass it off and it goes from there. So when I look at the claims of Jesus as God and the effect that it caused on people, like we had this Jesus character go to Jews and say radical things that ultimately, ended his life. But I don't think what we see, I don't think what is said in the Gospels as it relates to Jesus as God, for me, I don't see it as enough to have that worldview.
So you don't think that the Gospels are historically reliable? Is that the issue? Or like
there are things in the Gospels, and I don't have my spreadsheets on me. I normally do. I apologize. I do think there are some historical things, but I think we would both agree in good faith that there are some continued debates on issues with certain events that are really important within all the Gospels.
There's debates, but it doesn't mean that there's not objective truths, right, in the matter. Yeah. So sure, of course, historical criticism, and all that other kind of stuff, biblical criticism, all that. Of course, there's debates, right? You have Christian biblical scholars, you have atheist biblical scholars, you have people from all stripes disagreeing about various episodes in the Gospels and what really happened and what didn't happen. I don't think that a lot of their arguments that I see from the other side is particularly that great. I see a lot of bad, sloppy habits among a lot of biblical scholars. They overuse the argument from silence, for instance. They think that anytime that Matthew or Luke say something different than Mark, that they're just redacting. And they're not bringing any kind of independent information a lot of times, very black and white kind of thinking. There's a number of other kind of bad habits. So if you want to talk about reasons for why I think that the Gospels are historically reliable accounts, we could back up. We could definitely have that conversation. That's totally fine. I'm just starting where you wanted to start there, at least for now. And, I think you agree that this is a very strong claim, but it sounds to me like you might be questioning the historicity. Did Jesus say this, or was this something that later Christians put in his lips to make it out to be that he's maybe claiming to be God, or at least some kind of highly exalted person? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points. What I'll say to it, when we look back at that time period and what they knew to be true compared to what we know to be true now, I can find reasons that how that story played out would have happened. They were looking for messiahs. They were looking for the coming of a man. It was predicted, for 1,000 years before Christ came. And I think the way we can find answers to things they didn't know back then. For example, when Christ was going to people possessed, and this was proof to people that he had the authority of God to remove these demons, put them into swine, and they go over the cliff, I think it was. When you would have read that story, let's say before 1850, I think that's right around when the germ theory was actually proven. You can hypothesize now that there were issues, like there could have been a zoonosis issue, and these people weren't possessed. But for a long time, the majority of when the Bible was kind of going through history, people didn't know that. And I think we can see a lot of correlation. I think we can take a look at these and say that there's reasons, but we have better explanations now.
I think I would back up and I would press you on that. And
Mhm.
I would say basically what you're objecting to more is like a worldview that sees the miraculous. And if I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically we don't see that kind of thing. Therefore, what the Gospels are giving us is a kind of backwards, ancient view of the world that is superstitious and supernatural things just don't happen. We don't see that right now. Therefore, they're suspect. Is that fair?
That is fair. I don't think we can, when you have
Okay.
miracles, as you spoke of, when we give it over to
Mhm.
secular, I don't know, secular people, or we just, we find different things. We find reasons that it wasn't a miracle, like the four major prayer studies that have been done, I think, over the last 40 years. Not to get
Sure.
into that
Yeah,
point, but
we could talk.
yeah.
Well, we could. I don't mind talking about it. No, all right. Sometimes you just gotta circle the airport before you can find a good place to land. Okay. So that's totally fine. Let's talk about that for just a minute. All right. Again, on the slides, guys. So just bear with me. Oh, and I just kicked my own slides off. Give me 1 second here. Because this is something that I've looked into some detail. I have I have a friend who's writing a whole book on it, and who has really looked into this. And so basically what you're saying is that we should question the historical reliability of the gospel and acts primarily due to philosophical reasons around the presence of miracles within them. We've already established that, so I'm going to skip that. Okay. So, what I want to do, and I'm going to give you just like a handful of examples. Okay. And then you're welcome to push back on this, but I'm going to give you at least two or three, maybe four examples of modern miracle claims. Okay. But what I
Sure.
want to show here is that this demonstrates the existence of there are numerous, all right, religiously contextualized events that are well documented but lack adequate natural explanation. And that I would say we could reasonably deduce that Christianity provides the most plausible explanation for these occurrences, which should prompt you to reconsider maybe your philosophical bias against the text. Now, just so you know, I can totally sympathize with your position because before I became a Christian, I was also reading the Bible, and that was my biggest hangup. Is I would read like say the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm like, wow, Jesus is like a very interesting moral teacher and seems to be like a really kind of cool philosopher kind of guy. But then you'd read the very next chapter, and he's healing blind eyes and um, all of these different supernatural things, and you're like, well, this has got to be like folklore or fiction or embellished or something, right? And so now I want to talk about how we would even establish a miraculous healing. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to give you like some crappy anecdotes and just be like, well, therefore you should accept the miracles in the Bible. That would be pretty ridiculous, right? When it comes to evaluating a miracle claim, we ought to have an extremely high evidential standard, right? We don't want to just be gullible and accept any old claim that comes down the pike, right? That's not good, right? And so this is a criteria that was developed by Cardinal Lambertini. He later became a pope. This was around the time of the deist controversy, which you may or may be familiar with, where basically it's kind of a spin-off of the Enlightenment in the West, especially in like the UK and France. UK, I guess it was England at the time and all that other kind of stuff. They're all arguing about there's the deists who are saying there are no miracles, we don't see that. God exists, but there's just natural revelation, and he hasn't revealed himself into miracles and prophecies and all that other kind of stuff. And then of course you had the Protestants and the Catholics who like the Catholics are like, hey, you should believe our miracles. We got the miracles. And then you have the Protestants, which kind of swung in the opposite direction. And they're like all cessationists, and they're trying to debunk the Catholic miracles. And the deists are trying to pit them against each other and let them duke it out, right? So out of this, you have Cardinal Lambertini, who comes up with this criteria. And this is a criteria that the Catholic Church, in order to accept any kind of healing miracle in the church today, that has to pass this criteria and be thoroughly examined. Okay. Now, I'm not Catholic. There's other groups that use this as well, but it's just good criteria. Anyways, not to bloviate too much, but anyways, the diagnosis and the healing were both medically documented. It has to be medically documented. We need a doctor's confirmation. It has to be organic. It cannot just live in their mind. It cannot just be psychosomatic. The illness has to be getting progressively worse and showing no improvement prior to the healing. The healing has to be permanent and not temporary. It's not something that they could just, they were healed, but it was only lasted for like a few months and then they lost it. Okay. The healing has to be instantaneous, not gradual. This is not something that could go over a long period of months. This has to be something that's instant, right? And the healing was complete and not merely partial. In other words, they have to have full function of whatever they lost, okay? And then the healing has to be spontaneous. It cannot be attributable to treatment. We can't just say, well, like, could it have been the medicine that they were taking or was it the prayer, okay? It has to be not attributable to any kind of treatment. It has to be spontaneous. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple case studies here. This is Bruce Venata. I actually have an hour and a half long interview with this gentleman personally, where he talks to me about his experience, which includes also a near-death experience where he leaves his body, by the way. But the more stunning thing is that basically when Bruce, I don't know how many years ago this was, but a couple decades ago, he had his lower abdomen crushed underneath a semi-truck. He was helping a friend. He was working on a semi-truck late one night. The jack gave way. It landed and basically pancaked him to the ground right on his midsection. And he had several severed arteries. His survival was medically unexpected. He should have bled to death in 10 minutes. Subsequent medical studies show, at least at the moment, that he's the only person known to have survived such injuries. Now, that's not itself the miracle. The miracle is this. His small intestine was severely damaged. Most of it had to be removed. He only had 121 centimeters. Your average intestines, you said that you're into science and all that kind of stuff, 600 centimeters. His ileum was reduced from 350 to 25 centimeters. You can't live on that. He was unable to digest food properly, and his weight dropped from 180 to 125. This is some of the doctor notes here. It mentions that the ileum is the most critical part of your small intestines for nutrient absorption. Bruce only had 7% of that, which is normal. Now, what happened is that his wife gave out a call to prayer. Just anybody she could ask, like, please pray for Bruce, he's going to die. And it just so happens that there was a man in New York, Bruce was living in Wisconsin, heard about this, was praying one morning, and he heard like kind of an inward voice telling him to fly out to Wisconsin and pray for Bruce. He shrugged it off. He thought maybe he was crazy, but then the next morning, the exact same thing happened. So he figured, what the heck? I don't want this guy to die. He gets on a plane. He prays for Mr. Van Natta here. When he did, he felt an electric jolt in his body and was healed. His small intestine had doubled in length, became fully functional. This was actually confirmed by multiple radiologists. Now, I'm sure, as you're probably aware, we can't just cut somebody open and like just stretch out all their intestines and measure it. But by every measurement that we have available to us scientifically, from x-rays and everything else, like stuff that was gone is back. Okay. Now he remains healthy years later, defying all medical odds, right? He's still alive. He can eat food and all that other kind of stuff. He's still around. Right. And so now I'll give you another example real quick. This is Chris Gunderson, who actually happens to know Bruce Van Natta. They met because Bruce actually ended up praying for him. So Chris Gunderson, this was a person who was interviewed by my friend Dan Christopoulos. He's part of Inspiring Philosophy, like with Michael Jones's channel. Chris Gunderson was just 2 weeks old, and I have a 5-week-old, so this is just gut-wrenching to even think about. But he experienced severe vomiting. He was diagnosed with gastroparesis, which is a paralyzed stomach. He needed feeding tubes. Gastroparesis impedes stomach emptying. Medical technology manages the symptoms, but offers no cure. And usually you're going to die by the time you get to about 20, I believe. I could be mistaken about that, but these people don't normally, if you have this disease, you're not going to live very long. Surgeons added basically a limb at 11 months to reroute stomach emptying, and he relied on a feeding tube for 16 years. He struggled with adequate nutrition. He attended a church where Bruce Van Natta was sharing his healing testimony years later. Bruce has been invited to churches to share his testimony, which is understandable. His mom, Chris's mom was like, hey, why don't you go up and get prayer? Chris was very hesitant. He was a teenager at the time. But when he did go up and pray, he experienced pulsing and contraction sensations. He actually said it even hurt. But that night, Chris ate his first oral meal without complications. Before, if he wanted to taste food, he would take a couple bites and then he would just have to spit it out. He could not eat food at all. He had basically things in his stomach that was, feeding him basically. His primary care physician and gastroenterologist couldn't explain the resolution. 4 months later, because they wanted to be cautious about this, the tubes surgically were removed after healing, and it was documented as a medical case study. This is, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but this is a long comment from his doctor that basically says that this isn't something that really should be possible. And these are the things that we do, and saying that, yes, he does take food. He is now a nurse working in a hospital, right? So here are 2 cases that fit that criteria, and I can give you many, many more. And so this should raise the prior probability. It should fill our background information so that we should know, actually these things that are talked about in the Bible, miraculous healings, here's somebody who's healed of a paralyzed stomach. Here's a man whose intestines regrow. This ought to make us kind of reconsider, we can't just be staunch naturalists in light of these facts, I would say. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm a little bit familiar with the first case. What was his name again?
Bruce Van Allen.
Yeah, so Bruce. So when I read about that originally, I tried, let me digress. So would you agree that when you hear stories like this, it's very emotional? There's a shock effect to it, right?
Sure, of course. I mean, somebody's life is at stake.
Oh yeah. And then often if people are in a vulnerable place and they hear stuff like this and they're searching for answers, etc., stories like this and testimonies can really draw a person in.
Sure. I mean, everything you're saying from a psychological standpoint would be true.
Okay. The one thing I noticed about Bruce's story is, it's hard to reenact it. We're not going to go crush someone, and see if we can mimic and do an experiment. I couldn't find the medical records. Matter of fact, I didn't see any medical records on his story released to the public. This man had such a moving, honestly miraculous recovery. But you would think if it was legitimate, this man would want to put everything out there.
Yeah, I talked to Bruce, and he has given his medical records to several people before.
Where can I find it?
You can contact him, and he's willing to give them out. He's given them out, but he told me as many, many times, because he was met with the same initial skepticism, is that he doesn't mind giving them out to individuals, and he's that's totally fine. But he would give them out, and it was just it would change nothing. So at a certain point, he was like, what is the point? You're still scoffing at it, even after I give it out, which I agree sounds weird, but this is what was happening. I don't think that he was lying. And so, but he said, he said straight up on the live stream, people want to contact me. He's like, that's fine. I'm willing to give that information out.
And it's his privacy, right? It's his stuff.
Sure.
I don't fault him, but people like me or other scientific people in the field, or people that really want to see miracles be true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I work with somebody who, I work with a ministry called Talk About Doubts, where we talk to somebody who was in kind of a similar situation. They had a medical background, and I told him about the story with Bruce, and he contacted Bruce. And as far as I understand, he did get the information from Bruce. So you're welcome to contact him. Mm-hmm. Chris has, if you watch the stream with Dan and another friend of mine, Caleb Jackson, they do go over the medical records. They're on the screen. So that's stuff that's all present. These are 2 cases. There are many other cases with lots of medical information that is available and out there. I don't fault you at all. I think, we would want to see the information to make sure that this person is being honest. But I think at some point you do have to go, okay, well, is his family lying? Is he lying? Are these other people lying? Or is he just saying, oh, there's these doctors, but there really aren't, and that kind of thing. Bruce talks about the ER person, the emergency services person. He actually met with that person, the person that when he left his body, he basically said he saw this woman slapping him in the face and saying, Bruce, come back, come back, come back. He actually recently, when I talked to him, said that he had met with her and spent some time talking to her, and she gave it his vantage point and different things like that. And so I don't know. There's too many of these, I think, for it to just be like everybody's kind of hoaxing this and everybody's kind of lying about this kind of thing. And in the case, like I said, with Chris, his stuff is all completely out in the open. Pretty much any medical case that has been approved by Lords, all of the stuff is very much open and transparent, and different things like that. And so there are cases where they're totally transparent.
Right. I'm not doubting like there are some phenomenal some phenomenal things out there that are really, really hard to explain. For me, it's just hard to jump to a certain faith. I'll say two. One second. I'll say two. I'll say two things, and then I feel like we'll be talking for a long time. But the two things. I've got like 7 NDE books on my bookshelf. I used to love reading those stories. And the problem, unfortunately, that I found with it was I couldn't find a single peer-reviewed study that was credible, that we could repeat and mimic it. And the more we know about fMRIs and what parts of the brain do what they do, we can't mimic it. So we just have to see that these people have and like I said, I've read, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 different stories. They're all incredible. They all share the same kind of stuff, that they see when they're in that place. It moved me. And what the last point I'll make, which speaks to all of it, is I think it becomes, what's the word? It's very easy for people to hear things like this in a place of need. And we often hear, and it was true for me, that Christ comes to us when we're down. When we knock on the door and he says he'll open it, and we go in the closet and pray, and there he finally comes. I never had that Damascus Road experience, but so many people claim to, especially in the Gospels. Like some to the effect, not exactly like that, but it's so hit or miss, and it seems to be unreliable and inconsistent. And I wish it wasn't.
Well, the thing is, though, is that you have. I mean, what do you do when you have things that pass the criteria that I talked about, though, right? And so, to me, it makes it difficult to just go, like, you have to come up with an explanation, and it can't just be.
Why?
Why wouldn't you have to come up with an explanation, right?
And believe me, I'm a guy that loves explanations. I'm a guy that loves to find the answers and reasons. But some things we don't know, and I think it's intellectually irresponsible to just assume it has to be God.
No, I think that we do know, because in these contexts, it's always a context. Both of these were prayer, hearing of the voice of God in one of the cases, in the name of Jesus. All right. Besides also a sensation. Second of all, this context right here medically rules out these things happening, right? So it's not like, well, we don't know, but maybe some say science will tell us, and they're just anomalies until then. No, the more we know about medical science, the more that we know that these things are flat out impossible. So it's not just the fact that they happen, but it's the fact that they happen under specific contexts. And so it's not like, okay, now I understand, like, well, gee, it would be great. We could go in a lab and every time we pray, this is exactly what happens. But God is a person. So as somebody who is a person, he's going to act. He's going to use will. He's going to make decisions. That might raise problems for you, like with the problem of evil or something like that. But it doesn't do away with the evidence at all, in my opinion. It's like, it's still there. And so to just go anomaly and, I don't know. It's like, no, I think, again, this shows that these things that claim to have happened in the ministry of Jesus or in the ministry of the apostles are still things that, like, haven't stopped happening. There are reports of these, lots of reports, as you acknowledge. I'm not using NDEs for proof for Christianity or anything like that. So, like, whatever. But what I'm saying is, like, these are medically completely impossible from everything that we possibly know.
Let me ask you this before I go. it's kind of ambiguous. It's a little off the point, but it'll drive home, I think, what I'm trying to say. What is love? How do we know that we love?
What is love? Baby,
Yeah.
don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. No more. Okay, I'm sorry.
Like you say, like you said, you have a new child. Like,
Okay.
how do you know you love that child?
How do I know that I love the child? By
Could
when
you prove that you love that child? And if you could, how would it be done?
by my actions?
So
I think you might be able to hear him in the background right now. I don't know.
So
It's getting kind of loud.
So we can test it. It's chemicals.
If you're going to reduce everything to if you're going to beg the question for physicalism, sure.
So when I say break it down, elaborate why you find that to be disingenuous, I think, by your tone.
Huh? Oh, no, I'm not trying to be disingenuous. I'm just saying I just think that begs the question for physicalism, that we're going to reduce love to just chemical reactions in the brain.
My argument is everything derives from the brain.
Well, that's not an argument. That's an assertion. And
It's an assertion that speaks to what you have here on the screen. Is while we're able to get more in the heads of people and actually see what's going on and how certain things are happening, we can further argue why these things are likely to be happening. And what's great when you don't attach like a faith to this or God or whatever it is, you're allowed to keep searching for why it could happen. If you assign God to it, in my opinion, it's just done. It's over. Like, there's no more to be known. It was God, and that's
so it. Somebody's got an amputated limb in the case of Bruce, okay, or a paralyzed stomach in the case of Chris, right? And then they're prayed for in the name of Jesus. In one case, there's a person who basically hears an inward voice and acts upon it. And we know that their illnesses are not at all psychosomatic.
Right.
And this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to say, well, you're just filling in a gap that you don't understand with God, and you're impeding on discovery, because one day future scientists of the gaps will probably fill us in, and we're not justified in thinking that, like, given the religious the context of these whole scenarios, and these are just two out of like literally dozens and dozens that like I could talk about. Like there's a lot more than that. Like I don't think so. And I mean, like, if you could say, well, maybe these happen under non-theistic contexts, or maybe these happen under contexts of other religions or something like that, then maybe you would have a point. But every single one of these always happens in a Christian context.
You make a good point, and it could be God. I don't believe it is, but my rebuttal to that, which my dinner just got here, so I want to thank you for this. And
oh, sure, yeah,
I hope to come back. My rebuttal to this is in the example with the amputated arm. It's the common rebuttal is God seemed to chose. He seemed to pick. We have 50,000 people right now in a different part of the world that just died. But God chose to help one of the people, or if not both of the people in your example.
That's just the problem of evil.
What's that? Well, I mean, yes, it is the problem of evil, but it's I don't know, I can't think of the word. It basically it looks as though God picks and chooses, or it just seems like that at an eye level, when you look at it from above. So I don't know what to say to it when I'm in a rough place, or when I'm down, or when most people are and they want to choose to pray and don't hear anything. Yet we hear people like Bruce and the other gentlemen have this miraculous recovery. There are questions that I don't think we have real answers for. So,
well, I'll let you get your dinner. I can answer this real quick, or I can answer with you off stage. It's totally up to you.
I'll rewatch the video and I'll see the answer. But
okay, all right.
But yeah, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for coming. All right. So, do miracles make God unjust? No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And here's why. If God performs any miracles at all, then there is actually less pain and suffering in the world, not more. Okay. what he brings up is, well, why is God picking and choosing? Well, this is just the problem of evil, to be totally honest. Now, when I say just the problem of evil, hey, let's not be stupid. Let's not be insensitive. The problem of evil, especially like the evidential version of the problem of evil, especially, and you have different versions of the problem of evil, of like pointless sufferings and different things like that. There are stronger versions of it that do count as evidence against our view, right? We have to admit that data and it counts as evidence against, right? But there is a wide range of philosophical and biblical answers that can be said to the problem of pain and suffering and the problem of unanswered prayer. Like, these are things that have been around for thousands of years. Like, we've been talking about the problem of evil for forever. Theists have been talking about it forever. Atheism, I would argue, provides considerably fewer resources to explain cases where God seems to perform a miraculous healing. The instances in which God appears to heal somebody in response to prayer offer, in my opinion, far more compelling evidence for Christian theism than the counterexamples provide for their disconfirmation. In other words, there's an epistemic asymmetry here, right? He can't explain this evidence away. He's punting to future scientists of the gaps maybe we don't understand, and I don't know, appealing to some kind of emotion with love or something. I'm not quite sure. Super nice guy. I hope he comes back. I enjoyed my conversation with him, but like, it just feels a little psychology-izing. And so, but yeah, there's an epistemic asymmetry. He doesn't have an answer to this. Theists do have a problem. Answers to the problem of evil. They do, it can at least, all the theodicies, some of them are better than others, but if we can offer anything in response to the problem of evil, it blunts the force of that, right? Of why God might allow that. Also, experiencing miracles doesn't necessarily make one's life more comfortable. Paul experienced miracles and worked miracles. It did not make his life more comfortable, okay? And so just because you experience a miracle does not mean like, oh, okay, well, life is going to be a bed of roses now, right? So here's the final thing that I'll say to this is, if God were always to instantly answer our prayers the very moment we ask, regardless of our spiritual condition or circumstances, we would lose a ton of the benefits that come with soul building, growing in faith, growing in hope, growing in patience, growing in empathy, humility, courage. On the other hand, if God never answered our prayers in an extraordinary way, it would harm our relationship with him and would make us less dependent on him. We wouldn't have any past experience to reflect upon and see his noticeable goodness. We're in a situation where we actually have the best of both worlds. God allows sufficient suffering for character development, but he also extends help and mercy so that we can learn to better cooperate with him. We can see him in visible ways, right? Through these things. And so the other thing too is, I lost my train of thought there for a second, is basically, what was I going to say? I can't quite remember. Oh, well, those are the points that I think are sufficient, at least for now. And so, yeah. And then God, of course, and Christianity enters into the world in the person of Christ, works miracles, and then dies the most horrible death possible, then experiences one of the greatest miracles as possible. And so, anyways, those are just a few ways that I would kind of answer that. You can't just kind of slough this off and just go, well, anomalies happen. It's not an anomaly that a man's intestines regrow. It's not an anomaly that a guy with paralyzed stomach is healed and can digest food. It's not an anomaly when the eyes of the blind open when you have all of these different things. And there's other cases that I could bring up. So, all right. Anywho, we got we got, is that Shaq the Ninja Turtle there? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's an old profile picture, but I just had a question, man. I am a Christian, but
real quick, is it on the 5 topics? Do you see the topics?
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
I'd say it has some relation to the first one. Especially relating to Jesus's claims to be God. I just kind of wanted to ask you, why do you think it's so that John is so uniquely different to all the other gospels in the way that there's stories that aren't in there, that aren't in the others, outside of just because obviously John has the highest Christology, but even outside of the Christological evidence in it, there's also just a bunch of other stories that aren't in the other gospels, like Jesus saying that he's the way, the truth, and the life, right? All those statements. I kind of just wanted to hear your answer on why you think that's so.
So I can't remember exactly where it's at, but I believe it's Clement of Alexandria, who was one of the early church fathers, where basically the disciples, including Andrew, straight up like asked him, like, "Hey man, could you give us like another, like, can you fill us in on the details that you have?" And John specifically, it said that he specifically went out of his way to give us other stories and other details and things that Jesus said and did. Okay. So, like, we have at least from the early church fathers, and I can't remember the quote right off the top of my head. I'm really sorry. If I had my buddy Stephen Boyce here, he would remember it because he's like the church fathers master. And so, bruh. Sorry, there's a guy that's making goofy faces in the backstage, and I just banned him, but he came right back. Anyway, troll's gonna troll. So there's that. Okay, now I'm not saying like that's just strong evidence by itself. That's a claim, right? And so, but there's at least this early tradition that like that's why he went like out of his way. I think the more interesting question is like, is there good evidence that John was like a witness to what he saw, right? And I think we have like tons of good reasons to think that. If you want, I could kind of walk you through some of that if you're interested.
I do believe, I know that a lot of scholars take John to be anonymous, that it wasn't actually John who wrote it. I do believe that John definitely is a reliable account,
Okay.
especially since he was one of the closest apostles, right? You know, it was him,
Yeah.
Peter, James, and such. But I guess my hesitance is more so in the claim that in the quotations by Jesus that are found in John, like I said, the way, the truth, and the life quotation. If I remember correctly, that's in the presence of the other disciples as well. And to me, that
Mhm.
seems like a very, very firm, hard hitting thing to claim. You know what I mean? Like when I look at the other gospels, I think that there's a claim that Jesus is God in each gospel, regardless of,
Yeah.
if it's John or not. But
Right.
when you get to John and you see Jesus comparing himself to, the good shepherd, all these things, I put myself in the context of the audience at the time. And I think if I was hearing Jesus preaching and he was saying these things, me as a Jew or a Gentile in Rome at the time, I think that'd be a lot more of like oh wow, like this is serious stuff right here. This guy is claiming to be the actual way, the truth. He's not just pointing to or saying stuff like my father, things of that sort, but he's actually claiming to be the truth. You know what I mean? So I feel as though the other disciples, he, hearing something like that, or specifically Matthew, he'd at least record it as well. You know what I mean?
Well, you got to be careful with making like an argument from silence because there's a lot of things that we would expect people to record if they've really been there that don't. Like one of my favorite examples is you have U.S. Grant, who was the Civil War general for Abraham Lincoln and later became president. Like he's on our money. He had a diary every day where he's basically writing in this diary. He never mentions the Emancipation Proclamation. Like if we use that same kind of logic, we could just be like, well, like we could throw skepticism on that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so you have Josephus, who talks about all kinds of stuff going on, but he never mentions Claudius expelling the Jews from Rome. Like what's going on with that? You have Marco Polo, who travels all over China and does all this stuff. He never mentions the Great Wall of China or anything like that. You have Grafton's Chronicles mention the reign of King John, but he never mentions the Magna Carta. Like that's kind of a big thing to be bringing up. And so now I do think that the same Jesus, like people are kind of like, well, they're so different, and it's not really, it can't be the same Jesus. There is a lot of unity from shared language. Like let me show you some examples real quick here.
Okay.
Give me just a moment here. All right, so bear with me for just a second. And it's not just shared language, there's also some shared personality traits too that come out. And so, 1 second here. All right, so Matthew 10:25 through, or 23 through 25, when you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly, I tell you, will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The student is not above his teacher, nor the servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household, all right? And so, and if you just kind of flip over to John chapter 15, we see again some shared language here. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they'll persecute you also. If they obey my teaching, they will obey yours also. And so we see again some shared language there with what's being said. Let's look at another example here. I'll give you like several of these real quick. This is Matthew 9:37. Whoever welcomes one of these little, is this the right verse? Let me double check. Yeah. Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but him who sent me. And so again, scholars are like, whoa, Jesus is in the Gospels. He's so different. You know, he doesn't talk the same. He doesn't act the same. He's like this totally different person. But then you have John 13:20. Very truly, I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. Okay. So there's just another example of a lot of the shared language here. Let's take a look about Jesus's teachings on prayer. Some of the shared language there. Ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door shall be open to you. Let's see. Jesus says here, in that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly, I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until then, you have not asked anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy may be full. And so that's again reflective of the same kind of mind. And I could just go on and on. There are literally dozens of these. Some of them are really subtle in like the way Jesus talks, like his use of sarcasm. And so let me show you some of this here. In Luke chapter 13, it says, at that time some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, leave this place, go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you. Jesus replied, go tell that fox, I will keep driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will reach my goal. And in any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem. And so like there's this real sarcastic tone, like surely nobody can die. No prophet can die anywhere else but Jerusalem. There's this like, he's laying it on pretty thick. And basically he's like, hey, I know you guys are trying to kill me and I don't really care. He's just kind of like being sarcastic. He's calling somebody a fox. Well, if you look in John, we see again this like kind of subtle congruence of the same kind of like savage sarcasm. Here he says, you study the scriptures diligently because you think in them you have eternal life. These are the very scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me that have not life. I do not accept glory from human beings, but I know you do. I know that you don't have the love of God in your hearts. If I come in my Father's name, I have come in my Father's name and you don't accept me. But if somebody else comes in his own name, you'll accept him. So like, again, he's laying it on really harsh. He's laying it on really thick, right? And then you have another example of that is just kind of like his word parallels. And so here's kind of a funny one where Jesus sort of does a little bit of a wiener joke. So this is John chapter 7, and he's talking about the miracle where he raised the paralytic, right? And he says, Jesus said to them, I did one miracle and you guys are all amazed. Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, although it didn't actually come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a whole guy's body on the Sabbath? And so like, he's being really witty. He's taking like with his words, he's being kind of a savage. And then you see the exact kind of same thing in Luke chapter 13, where again, you have this witty word parallel of Jesus. And let me pull it up here. When he heals the woman who is bowed over. Let's see real quick. Let me see if I can find it. And so it says on the Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and there was a woman who had a crippled spirit. Anyways, he healed her, and they get mad at him for healing on the Sabbath. And he says, you hypocrites, doesn't each of you untie your donkey or ox on the stall and lead it to water on the Sabbath. And yet should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan has bound 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath from what bound her? And so here again, you see that same sort of savage wit. Like, one minute he's like, hey, you guys circumcise on the Sabbath, and yet I make a whole man whole on the Sabbath, and you guys are mad. And here he's saying something really similar. He's saying, hey, like, you feed a donkey and you take him to get a drink of water on the Sabbath, and you guys are mad at me because this lady, a daughter of Abraham, has been suffering for 18 years and I make her whole. And so there's this, what this tells us is that this all kind of goes to the same mind.
It's
And
the same
so
person in each gospel.
that's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And there are like dozens and dozens of examples kind of like these of like, I'll give you one more quick example, right? In John chapter 3, Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night, right? And he tries to butter up Jesus with a compliment. He says, Rabbi, we know that you're a teacher, came from God. No one could do these signs unless God is with him. And then Jesus is like, I'm not talking about this. He's like, don't butter me up, dude. Unless you're born again, you can't see the kingdom of God, right? And it's like, well, dude, like, where is that coming from? But you see this, like, again, where he just turns this stuff away. Like, there's a woman who in Luke chapter 11, verse 27 to 28, she's like, wow, like, you're amazing, teacher. Blessed are the breasts that fed you. And he's like, no, blessed is the womb. He says, blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and keep it, right? And so again, we see him deflecting a compliment. So these are like the subtle things. You could read John and go, wow, the theology is so different. But then when you look at like the subtle things, like, it's the same mind, it's the same guy, it's the same witty kind of person, it's the same kind of savage sarcasm, it's the same kind of person that turns away compliments. Like, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He's like, don't say that, like, follow the commands. Like, he just totally doesn't put up with it. And then you see all the shared language. I gave you like 3 examples, I could go through like 9, that it all goes back to the same dude.
Right. I guess the main reason I bring up that objection, it's been on my mind specifically because I remember seeing a debate with what's the guy's name? Zakir Ali, the Muslim dude, Zafir. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
Mm-mm.
Well, he brought up the point that
Shabir Ali?
Shabir Ali, there you go. That's what it is.
Yeah.
He was debating a Christian, and he had brought up the point that John, I guess, how would you reply to the Muslim that says out of all the Gospels, only John has all the I am statements? Would you say it's just because, for whatever reason, whether it's because of the you said the church father, the claim that he made, right? Would you say that for whatever reason John just chose to emphasize, I guess, that aspect of Christ specifically, whereas the other Gospels didn't?
No, I would say that basically Jesus already claims to be God in a very strong way, but he does it in a very Jewish kind of way in the other Gospels. And so he does actually say I am. He says I am twice, at least in the Synoptic Gospels. One, when he's on trial before the Sanhedrin, and they say, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? And he just flat out says, I am. Ego Amy. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hands of the Mighty One, coming in the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? Well, there was a belief that the Son of Man is like this ancient figure, or not ancient figure. He's this figure who basically he is God. He shares the authority and the honors of God. And I'm sure you're probably aware of this. But this is Daniel 7:13-14. In my night vision, I looked, and before me was one like a son of man coming in the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And so there is this second power, this second person who in Daniel shares the very same authority and the power of God. That's why they tear their clothes. That's why they say this is blasphemy. And here, this is an I am statement. And on top of that, then he says that I am the Son of Man. And this, again, is somebody who he's worshipped. He's given the same authority. He's given the same glory. He's given the same sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worship him, right? And lest we get confused and think that Daniel is talking about like just like an exalted man, this is the language that he reserves elsewhere, only for God. And so this is was it Nebuchadnezzar? Not Nebuchadnezzar. Darius. Darius is issuing a decree at the end of Daniel 6 after he's thrown into the lion's den. And he says, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. He is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never have any end. Well, does that sound familiar? That's like literally what we just read is the position that's given to the Son of Man. The other place where the I am is mentioned is in Mark chapter 6 when he is walking on the water. And so he says, let's see, I believe it's down in 50. Yeah, he says, take courage, it is I. Literally in the Greek, it is ego eimi, which is I am. It is I, don't be afraid. Then he climbed in the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts are hardened. And so here, he's walking on the water. He's doing something that only God can do, if I remember correctly. It's in Job 7:9. Oh, no, that's not it. I'm trying to remember where it says. I think it's Psalm 77. I know it's in Job too. Basically, there's in the Psalms and in the Proverbs, in the Psalms and in Job, it talks about how, your path led through the sea. This is talking about Yahweh. Your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints aren't seen. He's talking about, of course, the Exodus here, but he's saying that this is something that Yahweh can do, right? And so when Jesus is like, hey, it's me, take courage, he's drawing reference to the same Yahweh who part of the Red Sea, who walked on the water basically and led them through the sea, through the mighty waters where his footprints were not seen. And so he's drawing parallels deliberately there. And so I think he is saying it. Now, John, he's just coming out and he's saying it in kind of blunt ways, but there's so many ways in the synoptics that he says it too. And then we just have good reasons to think that John is a good historical, reliable source for a whole host of reasons. And so
I guess my point is more so textual rather than I think that's the way that you brought it back to Daniel and the Psalms. I think that's the best way to prove it, right? To a Muslim who has doubts about John. But I'm talking more so textual in the sense that I am the true vine, I am the resurrection, I am the gate, I am the light, I am the bread of life. How those exclusively are only found in John.
Yeah, and so again, there's good reasons for us to have that he actually did say those things from history. Why it's recorded and then in those gospels, not the others, again, would be kind of an argument from silence. We do know that Jesus does talk about being a shepherd, he tells a parable about a shepherd, I believe in Matthew 18, where basically he's kind of calling himself the shepherd. And so, it's out there. It's more in your face of these like claims, but again, I just would go back and say, well, listen, like we have all these reasons to think that John is historical, so like I just don't care. So if a Muslim comes at me and goes, okay, why does he only say these statements in John and not these others? I'm going to just be like, okay, well, John is specifically on purpose diverging from what the others said, but it doesn't mean that what he's saying is just him making stuff up. Let me show you. Yeah, let me just show you for all the historical reasons that John is a reliable gospel. That's just how I would handle that.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess one more point, or one more question rather, is this is something that I've never really heard anybody else speak about, which I don't know why it piqued my interest, but basically, during Jesus' trial, you see Jesus talking to Pilate, right? I guess at that point in the conversation, when Jesus and Pilate are going back and forth, who is really there to record that? Because it seems like it's more in like a private chamber between the two. You know what I mean? They're not really in the public anymore.
Sure. And so I don't see why Jesus couldn't have reported that. I don't see why somebody else who possibly could have been present could have reported that.
That's the idea I had. Like Jesus was obviously there, so perhaps after his resurrection, right, with the apostles for 40 days after, that he could have easily transmitted that. But I don't. In the context, I don't see anybody else around.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I can give you like 2 reasons to think that that's like not necessarily a hard thing to swallow, right? And so let me show you something real quick here. So This is Mark chapter 6, talking about Herod giving orders about John being arrested and all that kind of stuff. And it says, for John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have his mother's wife. Then Herodias nursed a grudge, blah, 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 blah. Let me see. I'm trying to remember where it says his servants. Yeah, there we go. All right, 14. That's where I was trying to go. King Herod heard about this, about Jesus healing people and doing miracles. And Jesus' name had become well known. And some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are working him. Others say Elijah. And I swear I'm missing something here. Where am I missing this? Anyways, basically in Mark's version, and for some reason I'm missing it, where Herod basically is like, who do people say that Jesus is? Like, what's the deal? How did he get these powers, right?
Right.
And you're kind of left wondering, like, okay, like, is Mark like some omniscient narrator? How does he know what Herod is even asking? And then you see kind of the same problem in Matthew's gospel. I'm sorry if I'm like not remembering the exact verse, but I remember these exact verses, so we should be good going forward. It says, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus and said to his attendants, this is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are working him. Oh, okay. I see what I'm saying now. In 1 minute, Herod says it. And then in this particular version, in Matthew's version, he says that he actually said it to his attendants. And the readers kind of left wondering, like, well, how in the world does Matthew have any clue what he's saying to his attendants in private, right? We're just kind of left wondering. But if we go to a completely unrelated passage that has absolutely nothing to do with the death of John the Baptist or this whole story, it talks about a list of female followers. Luke talks about this in Luke chapter 8. These female followers that were helping Jesus, providing for his disciples and just financially supporting him, right? And out of this list of female followers, one of them is mentioned Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. All right, so this is like a little puzzle piece that kind of comes in and fills the gap. But there's no way that Luke was like reading something in Matthew's gospel going, well, how do we know what he said to his servants? But this does absolutely explain it, right? Like if Jesus had female followers who were married to people who worked for Herod, it's very easily that they could have been a source for what Matthew wrote down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Now, I know this isn't the same thing as Pilate, but I'm just saying, like, we have one example of the private conversations going on, and then like we have a way of kind of understanding how that happens. Now, let me show you something else real quick here that goes kind of along with it. It's the same kind of evidence, right? And so it says in Luke 23, 2-4, it says, they begin to accuse him. We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus flat out says it, like, yep, you said it, right? And then Pilate, he does what? He announces to the chief priests and to the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. Now, hold on. Like, dude, what is going on? Like, why would he say that? They bring a serious charge. He's claiming to be a king. That's basically like Caesar's the king, right? You can't just do that. You can't just go around and call yourself a king. He asked Jesus about it. Jesus flat out admits it. And then he goes, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this guy. So we're left kind of wondering, but if we turn over to over to John, check this out. It said, Pilate went back inside of the palace, summoned Jesus, asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, what's weird is that in Luke's gospel, like, this question completely comes out of nowhere. Nobody's like, hey, he says he's a king. He says he's a king, right? It just comes out of nowhere. Like, what's up with that, right? And Jesus says, is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? And Pilate fires back, am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests have handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight. But my kingdom is from another place. And so, okay. Now we can see why Pilate was like, what? This guy's not a threat. He's a spiritual king. Pilate probably thinks he's a kook. He's a nut. He's not. He says, I'm not fighting. I have a spiritual kingdom. And so that makes sense, right? And so in John's gospel, the question just comes out of nowhere. People aren't saying he's saying this. He just flat out asks him. But then in Luke's gospel, we get this whole thing, this exchange that leaves us completely puzzled. But then John fills it in. But none of this is intentional. None of this is deliberate copying. But these are just two things that kind of fit together like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that are better explained on this being eyewitness testimony and people just kind of sharing what it is and it just naturally filling the gaps than like artful storytelling where John is just carefully copying, Luke or something like that and filling in a detail, but then leaving out a lot of what even brought up the conversation to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so for you had brought up the verse in Luke where Huza was the manager of Herod's household. That makes I've actually never heard of that verse or put it into
Mhm.
context like that. So that makes a ton of sense. But for this one
Yeah.
right here, where it says Pilate went back inside the palace, right? His palace, summoned Jesus and asked him. For that, would you say that's also for sure? Now I see the possibility of somebody. The disciples could have easily, right, have same thing with Herod, somebody close to Pilate, close to his
Yeah.
palace, whatever, working with them, ministry, all that. Would you say that that's plausible situation here with that?
I mean, we don't know. This could have been somebody that was, we don't know who it is. We don't have a source, but the fact that the story itself fits together with these undesigned kind of subtle ways where they're not trying to explain one another, but they just kind of like converge and kind of give you like this bigger picture and fill in each other's details. That's what we see in real eyewitness testimony, right? And so wherever they got the information, we don't know, but we know that it sure as heck looks like eyewitness testimony and not just like John very carefully crafting a story and like, oh, I read Luke and he said this. Well, that's weird. I'll just have him say that he's a spiritual king. But then, like, when Pilate even asks him the question, are you the king of the Jews? There's not even the charge of like basic like sedition, and trying to usurp Caesar and saying he's a king.
Right.
He just like asked him out of nowhere, like, dude, what's up? Like, what's up with that? So,
That makes
so
a
it
lot of
looks,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
it looks like totally looks like eyewitness testimony. So wherever we got it from, we don't know, but like it sure looks good. And so that's like an example of two examples of an undesigned coincidence, really three, because they go in both directions between John and Luke.
Okay.
With
All
this
right. Yeah.
particular.
Yeah. That was it for the little hesitances I had in my mind, and you certainly helped a lot, sir.
Awesome, man. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming.
All right. Take it
Yep.
easy.
Yeah, take care. All right, all right. I saw a few people say, yo, where are all the subscribers? That's a good question, man. The lives are a new thing. And so hopefully these are helpful and word spreads. And so I don't know, man. People probably watch me because of my shorts and short form content. I make videos 5 minutes long. So what kind of audience have I kind of grown? I've grown an audience that really likes short form. And so, but this is where I can kind of answer people's questions and all of that, answer questions in more depth, and people can kind of engage with me, mano y mano. So be sure to spread the word so this grows. And one way you can do that is hit that like button, just like Arius got hit by Saint Nick. And so do that. Make sure to subscribe, and then do all the things, share, and all of that good stuff. Leave comments and all of that. Also, if you are a patron, I just want to say thank you to all my patrons. I appreciate you very, very much. You help all of this possible, make all of this possible. Channel members too. So big thank you there. Again, if you want to support me on the regular, it's just patreon.com/isjesusalive. I know it's not Testify, which is confusing. I used to have a blog called Is Jesus Alive, and it's just hard to change it on Patreon. So that's the difference there. So yeah, do the things, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your prayers, and just any little thing helps. I'm not even just talking about the money. I'm talking about even the comments. The comments help. Anything that you could do to boost this in the algorithm, and hopefully it will grow. So, all right, we have a few more in the lobby. I've been going for what, about an hour and a half. We could do a few more. Vasu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
No,
What's
you're all
up,
good,
buddy?
mate. How are you?
I'm keeping it as real as the streets. Know what I mean?
Oh,
No, that's
love to
terrible.
hear
I'm
it.
sorry.
Love
Yeah.
to hear it. So I'm a doubt. So I am a Christian,
Mhm.
but I've been having something of a crisis of faith lately.
Okay.
So my background is in history and ancient history, and I can't help sometimes but see some of the gaps in the Gospels as far as the history is concerned. And now I'm not that well educated on apologetics or the historical context of the Gospels, but the Gospels are the main thing that tells us who Jesus is, and that he's God. And so when I see stuff like, for example, the census of Quirinus,
Mhm.
or the timing of when he was crucified, overlapping with the Sabbath, that's just two examples. But the census especially is the big one for me.
Census? Yeah, we could talk about the
Yeah.
census. Give me just a moment. I just answered this one, the last one, but dude, it's totally fine. I do not mind repeating myself at all. I don't expect
Sorry,
people to
mate.
watch every single. No, not a problem at all. I fully expect to do these kind of things. So give me just a second. I have some slides on the census. So I'm going to pull those up here. All right. Bear with me for just a second here. Computer's going really slow. Eventually it'll work. Let me close some tabs. Kind of, I got a little bit of a older laptop that's not the greatest, so just do what you can with what you got, right? All right. All right, here we go. So the census, yeah, we could talk about that a little bit. So basically, the of course my camera goes out. 1 second. Hey patrons, help me buy some new equipment. This is what I'm working with here, guys. This is what I'm working with here. All right. So the list of complaints with the census, this is the biggie, right? This is the skeptics like go to when it comes to the complaint against the Gospels. Is number one, you'll hear this from like Dan McClellan, you hear this from Bart Ehrman, all these guys, right? Number one, they'll say that there's a 10-year gap between Matthew and Luke's timelines. There's 6 different complaints, and we don't have to go through all 6. But I'll get started, and if you're like, okay, man, I got it, then we'll move on. They'll also say that there's no census during the time of Jesus's birth. We don't have any record of that. They'll also say Quirinius was not in charge of any earlier census. Luke is just like way wrong here. They also say that Rome would have never conducted a census under a client king, and that nobody would have traveled to their 1,000-year ancestral home to register for a census. And they'll say that Luke was just making all this to have Jesus born in Bethlehem in order to fulfill a Micah 5:2 prophecy. You know what I'm talking about, the prophecy where basically the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem, correct? You know what I'm talking about there.
Like Line of David.
Yeah, exactly. So the prophecy, well, number one, let's just tackle number 6 just right out the gate real quick. The whole idea that Luke created a census to get Jesus from Nazareth to Bethlehem in order to fulfill a prophecy is totally bananas. Because first of all, he could have easily been called out if he did make a mistake on the census, and make all these supposed historical blunders. Inventing a census to get Jesus up to Bethlehem to fulfill a prophecy contrary to the facts. There are a lot easier ways to do that. If you want to make up a story about Jesus being born in Bethlehem, you could have just had him born there, right? You could have just said that Joseph had property there and he had to visit or something like that. There could have been a number of reasons. A census is like the heaviest handed, ham-fisted, clumsiest plot device that one could ever even invent, especially to fulfill a prophecy that Luke never even refers to whatsoever. And Luke refers to Jesus fulfilling prophecy. He has him saying in the 4th chapter, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach the gospel, yada, 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 right? He has him talking to John the Baptist and quoting Isaiah 35, saying that, hey, I'm the Messiah, I do all these miracles, right? He has Jesus quoting Isaiah 53, saying, I'm going to be numbered with the transgressors. He knows when to rely on prophecy and quote prophecy when he wants to. And so that's just bonkers. That's just bananas. Second of all, with this whole idea that there's a 10-year gap between Matthew and Luke, here's the apparent contradiction, just so people know. Matthew places Jesus' birth during the reign of King Herod the Great, who died in 4 BC. So the birth must have been before then. But Luke mentions a census under Quirinius, who became governor in 6 AD, and that's the only recorded Roman census in the region, and it happened a decade later. And so, like, haha, checkmate, Christians, there's a 10-year gap. Your gospel writers are bozos, right? That's basically the contradiction in a nutshell. But before we answer, is that really what Luke is thinking? Is that really what he's saying? Luke actually begins his gospel by anchoring the whole narrative in the reign of Herod the Great. This is what he says, Luke 1:5, in the days of Herod, king of Judea. That's when John the Baptist is conceived, and shortly after, Jesus, 6 months later, right? So right from the very get-go, Luke puts Jesus's birth during Herod's reign. Like, that's just facts, okay? Moreover, he knows when Jesus was born, because he says he's 30 years old in Luke chapter 3, verse 23, right? And when is that? Luke 3:1, it tells us that it was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. That's 28 AD. So that places his birth, if he's 30 years old, around 5 to 6 BC, which fits perfectly with the end of Herod's reign. And so he also references the AD 6 census in Acts chapter 5, verse 37. He ties it to Judas the Galilean's revolt, which is years after Jesus' birth. So Luke totally shows a clear awareness of the 86 census. He keeps it completely separate from the nativity timeline. He's mentioning that census there. So any explanation that we have, it has to be consistent with these facts. Like, Luke is not this big of a dummy, right? Like, it doesn't even make any sense. So how do we explain this? Well, there's a couple ways, and it kind of gets involved in the Greek. Now, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm drawing this from N.T. Wright, who reads the New Testament in Greek. And he points out that the Greek word prote can be taken comparatively as in before. So in Luke 2:2, the way that it could be translated is, instead of saying this was the first census that took place, he's saying this census took place before the one when Quirinius was governor of Syria. That reading fits the known Greek idioms. We see the same kind of thing in John 1:15, Jeremiah 29:2. If that's correct, then what Luke is saying is that there are two registrations, one around the time of Jesus' birth, which is during Herod's rule, and a later, more infamous one, the one that actually caused the revolt under Quirinius in 6 AD. Right? Now, other scholars like Ebrard and Godet note that Luke's wording could mean the registration began earlier, but was completed under Quirinius. So the Greek term apographe can mean a registration or a census list, or it could also mean a taxation process based on that registration. Well, we do have from Josephus that their registration began in 6 BC, when there was a loyalty oath that was required by Caesar for the Jews at that time. And then Quirinius carried out the taxation, which they could have used for the taxation when they carried it out in AD 6. Now, more on that in just a minute. So if either option is correct, Luke's account makes perfect sense. He refers to a registration in Herod's time, which Josephus also indirectly mentions, the whole loyalty oath thing. He separately knows about a later Quirinius taxation. So the supposed 10-year blunder, it just completely disappears. It evaporates. It's just two connected but distinct events. And so Luke isn't wrong. People are just assuming there was one census and only one census only. So does all of that make sense at this so far, Pastor?
Are we, is there a risk of relying a bit too heavily on Josephus?
You could, but I mean, Josephus is taken to, even by the critics, to be a pretty good historical source. Now, there are people who have written papers on this, whole academic papers, who are just like, yeah, Josephus does at times make mistakes. And so it could be that Josephus just made a mistake, and Luke actually is the one, because he's closer to the events, and we have a lot of really good reasons to think that Luke is a reliable historian. And so it's not really Luke who's making the mistake here. It's Josephus. My friend Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy has a whole long video on that, and he gets into a lot of it. It's a little complicated. It's pretty technical, but that's something you could check out as well. And so that is a possibility, and I think that's one that Wes Huff kind of floats. I've heard him mention that as well, and so that's a possibility as well.
So I suppose what I'm hearing is that there's a more likely what the writers of the Gospels were intending was that the census that took place around that time was a continuation of this sort of Romanization of Judea more than it was the beginning.
Yeah, there was a loyalty oath that was required around 6 AD because Herod fell out of the good graces of Caesar. And Caesar basically sent him a strongly worded letter and said, hey, I was treating you as my friend, Rex Amicus, but now I'm basically going to treat you as my subject, Res Socius. Or I might have flipped the Latin around, but my brain is getting a little fuzzy. But yeah, that's basically it. And so there was this loyalty oath, and then they could have used that same data to be like, okay, now we're going to carry out the census later. And so there are these two different events that are being conflated here.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, real quick, to answer this a little bit further here, Bart Ehrman and others will say there's not a single reference to any such census in any ancient source apart from Luke. And so Bart is going to say Luke, he's the only person that mentions this census. So therefore that's sus, which number one, that's kind of ridiculous because that's just an argument from silence. Luke is in fact a historical source. And sometimes in any historical account, we only have one source. So I don't see what the problem is, especially if Luke does nail dozens of tiny incidental facts about things like in the book of Acts, chapter 13 through 28, as documented by Colin Hemmer in his magisterial work, the book of Acts in the setting of Hellenistic history, where Luke gets overland routes, right? City names, like small places, right? Titles of local officials, provincial boundaries, sea travel, local religious customs, slang, legal procedures, dialects, all kinds of things without the help of like Google, ChatGPT, or Wikipedia. There aren't kind of things that you could just kind of like look up and, online and just cobble together a story. Luke shows himself over and over to be a good, credible historical source. But worse is that the claim is actually just flat out wrong. In the deeds of divine, the deeds of the divine Augustus, Caesar literally says, Augustus says, hey, I conducted 3 censuses in which 4 million Roman citizens were registered. Right?
Wow, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So the first of these began in 8 BC. They were primarily for Roman citizens, but it shows that empire-wide census activity was already happening at the time Luke describes. I don't know, anything with Rome, it's going to be staggered. It's going to hit different regions at different times. It's going to take a long period of time. Paul Meyer talks about a census that he's a classical historian, a census that was taken in Gaul around that time that took like 20 years to complete, right? Not only that, but we have the epitaph of Secundus. This is Quintus Aemilius Secundus. He documents a census in Syria conducted under Quirinius around 9 to 6 BC, the right time frame for Jesus's birth. This is archaeological evidence right here. This is from Titus Kennedy, who documents this in one of his books. This is where I grabbed the picture. But yeah, the text right there calls him a legate of Syria, legate of Caesar in Syria, and links him to a military census in the region of 120,000 citizens, right? So the inscription supports the idea of a 2-phase process. The first phase began around 8 to 6 BC during Herod's time, involving registrations of oaths of allegiance, and the second phase under Quirinius's formal governorship in 86, which finished the taxation and sparked the revolt of Judas the Galilean. But the objection is, well, Quirinius wasn't a governor at the time, so Luke must have been mistaken. That wasn't his authority, right? He was in authority. He was a military leader, but he's not an actual governor, as Luke says. But Luke doesn't use the noun for governor. He uses a verb. He uses a Greek verb that means ruling or governing. And so it doesn't require Quirinius to actually be the official legate in Syria. And even Greek lexicons say that this is a function in a leadership capacity to govern or to rule. It's used for both governors and other officials. So Luke's wording actually fits someone like Quirinius, who likely had administrative oversight before his formal appointment. Josephus may not have even listed him as a governor yet, but Tacitus, in his Annals in 348, actually confirms that Quirinius did serve in Syria before 6 AD. We already have the archaeological evidence. Now we have Tacitus who mentions it. Plus, we have Justin Martyr in AD 50, a church father, who mentions the census under Quirinius and tells readers to check the Roman archives. This is in First Apology 34. Justin calls Quirinius a Pitropos, a procurator, not a governor, which would be a lower-ranking official tasked with administrative duties. Well, administrative duties, that could definitely be collecting, taxes and censuses and all that other kind of stuff. Taxes, censuses, tripping over my words a little bit. So both sources support the idea that Quirinius had authority in Syria during the time of the census. And then Tertullian, just 50 years later, says the census Joseph participated in took place under Governor Saturninus. This suggests that Quirinius wasn't the governor, but likely the procurator or official carrying it out, that he had administrative oversight under Saturninus, which explains why Luke names him, and that he's basically the guy running the show. He's just not the guy with the title. And so all of this is converging, right? All of this. We have church fathers. We have all of this stuff. Tacitus, this inscription. Now, the pushback that you'll hear, and this is one Orthodox Muslim said that I was retarded basically over because I didn't mention this in the video. He did though. He basically was like, "You're so stupid," I don't know. He's very theatrical. But he pointed out Judea wasn't a Roman province until 6 AD. Rome wouldn't have ordered a census under a client king. Herod was the client king. If somebody's going to order a census, it's going to be Herod. Well, I'm not stupid. I just didn't include it in a 5-minute video. First of all, there's a big problem with this objection. Number one, there was no handbook of how to govern Roman client kingdoms that says you can't conduct a census. This is just doing a priori history. We're just assuming what ancients would do, and based on what we think, right? Not on any hard evidence, right? This is bad because it's just an argument from silence. But even if such a law existed, it wouldn't have proved that the census never happened. Governments often break their own rules, right? So the Soviet Constitution, for example, promised religious freedom, but they still persecuted the crap out of Christians, right? The U.S. protects assembly rights, but we all know during COVID, they all banned gatherings. You could imagine somebody writing from, 1,000 years from now being like, "Oh yeah, they would have never done that. They have assembly rights." No, critics are just way too overconfident. But worse, way worse, is that we do know that Rome did intervene in client kingdoms. Tacitus in Annals 641 reports that in AD 36, Rome intervened to enforce a census in Cilicia, a client kingdom, not a Roman province. The local king initiated the census, but Rome pressed the Clitae tribe to conform to Roman usage, submitting to census and tribute, right? I won't get into the rest of the details here, but that's just one example. Also, and this is, I think, even more important, and I already alluded to this, Herod's autonomy was greatly reduced near the end of his reign. Augustus demoted him from friend to subject. He was basically ticked off at him because of the crazy, paranoid, bloody way that he was running his kingdom. Herod lost key powers, would have lost key powers during this, which would have included what? Maybe, I don't know, taxing authority. And Josephus, again, records that the Romans did require citizens of Herod's very own realm to swear allegiance to Caesar. This is in Antiquities. And so this would have marked a step towards reducing Palestine from a kingdom to a Roman province. Exactly the kind of event that fits the registration. And so Herod was not fully independent, right? He wasn't. Do you want me to go on, or is this good for now? There's more to the objections. I could go through the whole 6. These are the first 4. These are the biggest ones.
I think that mostly covers all the, especially that stuff about the client kingdoms. That covers a lot of what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suppose that also ties into other objections that people have, like the massacre of the infants. Because that seems really in character for Herod.
Absolutely, 100%.
And is there anything to that as well? Because the main defense that I've heard about the massacre of the innocents from Christian apologists is that Nazareth at the time would have had a small enough population that really it would have been about 20 or so children killed. and so that wouldn't have been noteworthy for any historian to record. Is there any merit to that argument?
Yeah, I would say so. And so with the Massacre of the Innocents, you're right. What the argument is basically this is Josephus mentions a lot of the evil bloody deeds of Herod. And so like why doesn't he mention this? Like Herod the baby killer? Like that seems kind of important. And they'll say something like, well, Matthew had Proust text fever and he read something in Jeremiah where it talks about Rachel weeping for her children. And he just is like, yeah, that sounds messianic. Let me make up a story on that. So the reason why that theory fails hard is number one, Alfred Edersheim, who wrote The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, scholar, he catalogs 456 messianic glosses in the Targums and Talmud. None of those texts tie Jeremiah 31:15 to any messianic story. So if a first century writer wanted to invent a popular messianic origin story, he would have picked an actual messianic text, right? So the best explanation is that Matthew actually wrote about something that he knew. I agree with you that it was a small hamlet. Bethlehem probably was only like, we're talking about maybe 12 to 20 kids, right? The one thing that I would add to that is that Josephus was writing to a Roman audience, and think about what the Romans did. Infanticide was like a big thing. Exposure was something that the Christians were very famous for, like putting a stop to. Like the people would just have a child and just leave it out and let the baby basically die or get eaten by animals, right? Pretty rough. And so a handful of dead children might not have been like a big thing, but the biggest problem that I have is it's just a ridiculous, weak argument from silence, right? Josephus doesn't mention Claudius expelling the Jews from Rome. Luke does. Suetonius does, right? And as I mentioned, with the other guy with arguments from silence, like Eusebius, like he never mentions the deaths of Crispus and Fausta, Constantine's children. Like seems kind of important, but he doesn't mention it. And there's just on and on and on. We could list numerous examples of like why the argument from silence is really sketchy. And so, yeah. Now, the big thing that I think is important, and let me share something, is we actually have positive evidence for the Massacre of the Innocents. Okay. Because in the same story, in Matthew chapter 2, verses 22, we read about what happened after this was over. And then Joseph is basically told, like, okay, you can come back now. And so Joseph starts heading back, and he's going to go back to Bethlehem, right? But it says in Matthew 2:22, it says, when Joseph heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. Okay. So like, what's going on here? Like, that's kind of strange, right? What was it? Since Herod the Great was dead, it was only natural that Archelaus would inherit the throne. So like, why does this cause Joseph to kind of panic and change plans and move to Galilee instead? Well, Josephus again comes to the rescue and gives us some background information, right? So after Herod's death in 4 BC, his kingdom was divided. Archelaus got Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Antipas got Galilee, where Joseph ends up settling. Archelaus' army calls him king, but Caesar just gives him the title ethnarch, not king. And as the feast, when there was a Passover a year before, where there was basically an event, and Herod did something kind of unpopular, and people were still mad at the Romans, okay? When Archelaus, the first Passover, when he's ruling over the area, there's a mob of angry Jews who are still upset about this particular scenario, and they pick up rocks, and they stone some Roman soldiers to death. So Archelaus gets wind of this. He completely panics. He sends an army to surround the temple and says, nobody who's in there can come out, and nobody is going in. And he massacres 3,000 Jews. Passover that year was canceled. Like, this is huge. Like, this is big, right? So now, we understand Joseph's decision in context. As Mary, Joseph, and the young Jesus journeyed north from Egypt, they likely met distressed Jewish pilgrims, because Alexandria was a big Jewish population. And we know that Jews came from all over the diaspora to celebrate Passover. They likely met distressed Jewish pilgrims sharing the horrid news of Archelaus's massacre. And so think about it. If you're Joseph, the dad here protecting your child, having narrowly escaped one homicidal maniac, they understandably would have been reluctant to settle in that territory of another. And so, like, no, we're not going there. Let's go to where Antipas is at, and I got, land in Nazareth or something, and we'll do stuff there. And so there you go. That's right in the middle of the story. But if we're just reading Matthew, we don't know this background, right? But it's very unlikely that he's reading Josephus and like, oh, this is cool. Let me fill this in with these details, but then like not talk about the context whatsoever. So it's like an undesigned coincidence between Matthew and Josephus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And it shows, I think, it makes it a bit more reliable.
Mm-hmm.
My second, you're going to the end of the Gospels now. My second thing is the date or the time when Jesus was crucified. So I don't know where I read this from, but I think it was it the trial that was on the Sabbath, or was it the crucifixion, or was he arrested on the Sabbath?
Are you talking about the alleged contradiction between John and Mark's gospel?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We could talk about that. It is kind of a detailed one. And so let me see what I can find here real quick. Because it gets a little complicated. I have a video on it. I did a response to, who was it? Useful Charts. Because he did a whole video on the date of the crucifixion.
Maybe we can do like a TLDR and then I can go watch that video.
Yeah. So basically it's not, there's a lot to it, and I'm pulling up my notes here. So 1 second. It's one of those that, like, off the top of my head, because there's kind of a lot of moving pieces with it. It's kind of hard to explain. And so give me just 1 second. Basically, in a nutshell, it's just a misreading of the actual date of the Passover. There's two different meals, and John is talking about a completely different meal, right? And so there's actually not a contradiction at all. And there's a way that the timelines actually line up in, like, again, with another undesigned coincidence, where both Matthew and John converge in the dates in a way that it would be something that they're just making up or from copying each other, and they actually do show that they are the same. And so I'm trying to find my notes because that would help a lot. Oh, that's probably not the right one. I have an article. I have a blog post. I could probably just put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Mark. Yeah. The problem with, like, when you're doing history is it's like, if you don't have your notes, it's like, okay, if I haven't talked about it in the last week, I probably am not going to remember. And so, yeah, so basically in Mark 14:12, it says, on the first day of the unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where will you go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And then the Last Supper happens afterwards. In John 19:14, it describes the scene where Jesus is condemned to death, and it says, this was the day of the preparation of Passover. And so what people say, what critics say, is that according to Mark, the Last Supper takes place on the first day of the Passover. John is then arrested at night and crucified the next day, which would be the first day of Passover. But John tells us that the crucifixion took place on the day of preparation for the Passover, which actually happens the day before. But what the problem is that John doesn't actually say that it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. He says that it was the day of the preparation of Passover. And Mark actually uses the same term, but unlike John, he explains what it means to his Gentile audience. And so in Mark, it says in 15:42, it says, when evening had already come because of the preparation day, that is before the Sabbath. So the whole term preparation is preparation for the Sabbath. Okay. And then when you look at John 19:31, it says, then the Jews, because it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken so that they might be taken away. And so John actually agrees with Mark that it was the day before the Sabbath, and that's what he means by preparation, right? Now, there's another argument where it says that that John says that the Sabbath was a high day, meaning that it was a Passover during the Sabbath week. But the other issue is that what skeptics will say, and this is what Useful Chart said, this is what you hear a lot from a number of different people. They're quick to point out that in John 18:28, it indicates that the Passover had already happened. In John 18:28, I'm just quoting it. It says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early. They did not themselves enter into the praetorium, so they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover." So basically, in a nutshell, they avoided entering the Gentile court so they could eat the Passover and avoid being ritually unclean. So John seems to definitely be saying that the Passover hadn't happened yet. But in order to understand what's going on here, we need to actually understand the Passover. In John's gospel, there are multiple mentions of festivals, and he mentions Passover 8 times, and it's always referred to as a week-long affair. He never refers to it as just the starting meal. And there's more than just one ritual meal eaten during Passover week. You have the Seder, but you also have the Hagiga, which means festival offering. This was another meal that was eaten around lunchtime the following day, aka the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And there's even a whole tractate in the Talmud devoted to mid-festival days that details all the differences, called Moed Katan. But anyways, the chief priests couldn't be concerned about the Seder meal, but some other meal. Why? Because if they entered Pilate's courts and defiled themselves, their defilement would expire at sundown. They just would need to wash, and then they'd be ceremonially clean for the evening. So there's actually no problem. There's actually no discrepancy at all. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I go more into this in the video. Also, Michael has a video of Inspiring Philosophy that he goes into this as well. And so you could kind of avail yourself to those. And so does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, mate. Thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, I hope this was helpful. I got a few more, and so I appreciate you coming up. And anytime you want to come back, feel free to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you, mate.
Yep. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Let's see how much time. Been going 2 hours. Could probably only do one more, and I might have to keep it brief. Might have to keep it more on the brief side. So Paulie has been waiting a long time. Paulie, what's up, man? Yeah, you're muted. Oh, are you still there? Paulie. Going once. Going twice. All right. If he wants to come back, he can. Damagoy? I might be mispronouncing your name. If I am, I apologize. You are on stage. Damagoy. Hope I'm saying your name right. Damagoy. Nope, he hopped off. Sentinel says basically John's Passover lamb references do not refer to the Passover meal, but rather the entire celebration. Correct. Absolutely, Sentinel. That's what I was just saying. Just saying that is correct. He also mentions the best book on the subject is Jesus and the Last Supper by Brant Pitre. I haven't read that one. I love Brant. I love his book on the Christology and the Synoptics. I can't remember the name of it all of a sudden off the top of my head, but that is a very good book. Life is one back. Let's see. Life, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you all right. Sounds like you might be driving. Are you keeping it safe, man?
Yeah, I keep it saying, y'all on my speaker.
Okay. All right. I got about 15 minutes, so I apologize if I have to kind of not give you as much time as some of the other guys. But what can I talk to you about? What do you want to? What's on your mind?
So I want to understand the truthfulness of Christianity. I think Christianity has too many contradictions in order for it to be true. You have too many denominations. You have too many splits for it to hold any actual facts. If you guys as a community cannot come together and have a factual stand ground as to what the true way to Jesus Christ is, and I'm not talking about, we can already just escape Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and put them aside. I'm talking about Christians. You guys cannot come together as a group to come to a conclusion. How can a group of people who hold to one truth can't come to a one understanding?
Okay. So The topics that I go over, and I went over this at the beginning, and most people caught it, but you might not have, and that's totally fine, man. I'm talking about evidence for Christianity on here. So the topics would be the resurrection of Jesus. Did Jesus claim to be God? Is Paul a true apostle? Do miracles still happen today? Are there Christian miracles? And did Jesus fulfill messianic prophecy? Virtually all Christians will accept all of those things. If you want to talk about one of those particular topics, I'm kind of more of a history kind of guy. That's fine. But that's the topic.
Where did he claim to be God? From what end? And I'm not talking about like John 1:1, the Father and I are one, or before Abraham I was. Where does he actually explicitly state that he was God?
Does Jesus have to explicitly say, "I am God, worship me," and use those exact words in order to claim to be God?
I've heard that argument before. However, it would have negated the whole. This question would have never existed had he just done that. What was so difficult about stating that specific thing? If he already claimed to be God, why not just say it?
If he was speaking to a Jewish audience and he said things that Jews would understand him saying that he's claiming to be God, would that count as him claiming to be God? He's talking to a Jewish audience in a Jewish context. And if he said things that only God would say, well, there's multiple examples. I'm just asking,
Well, I mean, that in that statement, what you would say would hold truth. However, the fact that he went out to tell his disciples to go and preach to the Gentiles, he should have made it clear in that point, don't you think? If the Jews were the only audience ever, yes, but then he went out to preach to the Gentiles. Why not affirm that to the Gentiles?
Did John the Apostle preach to the Gentiles?
I'm not sure. Did he?
Yeah, he lived in Ephesus, which is a Gentile region. It's not a Jewish place.
No, but why not? That's what I'm saying. Why not just state to them that he is God, and why Jesus didn't just affirm and tell the apostles, tell them I am God?
So when Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," and John writes it down, or when John writes down, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God," and he has Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one," and he has him saying, "Before Abraham was, I am." Wouldn't that be clear? Like, didn't the early Christians just believe that that's what they were saying? When Paul says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And then he goes on to clarify, and he quotes Joel chapter 2, verse 32, says, "Whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." Well, hold on, you gotta let me finish my point. You gotta let me finish my point. So Joel 2:32 is referring to Yahweh, and yet Paul is saying that's Yahweh. And then when Paul says that the gospel that I preached is the same gospel that the apostles preached, then that's Paul in a very early part of Christianity saying that to be a Christian, you have to believe that Jesus is God and that he was resurrected from the dead.
Okay. Now to as a little rebuttal, and before Jesus came, did they believe in God?
Before Jesus came, they were Jews. Yeah. Are
Right.
you a Muslim?
So, no, I'm not a Muslim.
Okay, just checking.
And I get the like that understanding, but my thing is this, right? So if Jesus, right, he didn't make himself known that he was God, and then it just said, like you said, Thomas said, you know, my Lord, my God. If they already understood that there was a God, and then Jesus came and they called him Lord, wouldn't they just separate the two? That's still not affirming Jesus as God.
They did separate the two. They just had a plurality of they basically just said that there is one God, but there are more than one persons in the essence of God. That God is multi-personal, which is completely consistent with Judaism. Which is completely consistent with Judaism. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so why not just affirm? Why not just affirm the divinity instead of having people speculate? Because if it was gonna cause confusion down the road, right? And Jesus would know all things, why not just affirm it on solid foundation to say, the God you pray, I am that God as well as your Lord. Wouldn't that just have mitigated everything? Why have to use metaphors to establish something that he already knew he was? Why
Because
not just say,
he's speaking to a Jewish audience, and anytime he came close to saying something like that, they like directly as that, they picked up stones to stone him. So he's going to speak in riddles, he's going to speak in parables, he's going to speak in a way that's not necessarily going to get him killed, but if they stop and sit and think about what he's actually saying.
But if they were gonna stone him when he said before Abraham was I am, they were already trying to stone him there. Why didn't he just affirm that?
You're cutting out. You're cutting out. I'm sorry. Say that again.
I said if they were already going to stone him when he had said to the Jews before Abraham was I am, why didn't he just say I am the God that Abraham was serving? If they were already going to stone him in that point in time, why not just say that instead?
He did say that. That's he said the equivalent of that. Before Abraham was I am.
Okay,
He's saying before Abraham even came into existence, I pre-existed. I am as in
who was before Abraham? Was not Adam before Abraham?
Are you a Unitarian? I am is the divine name.
No,
it's in Exodus 3:14.
Okay.
Do you understand what Christians believe about this?
To the question still. Right, you guys believe in the understanding that the metaphors that Jesus used, the Father and I are one. Whatever the Son sees the Father does, the Son does also. Before Abraham was I am. I get that he used metaphors. I understand that logic. What I'm asking is if he used all these metaphors, right? If he was going to get I am, right? He was already going to get stoned. Why not just say I am God? Why not?
So
you're saying that
when he says before Abraham was,
why didn't he just say it?
Yeah, this is just a really weak. This is a bad argument. And so, Exodus 3:14, God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." And so, when he's referring to this, he's calling himself by the divine name found in Exodus.
I get that same response every single but the question when this question comes up, right? It's simple when I always hear, well, he is stating it by a metaphor by stating me and the Father. This is not metaphorical. I am before I am. Why not just say the words? Let exclude how the Muslim thinking, right? My whole question is why did he use metaphors? Why didn't he just say that instead of saying something equivalent to it? Why not just say it if he was already saying it?
They did understand him to be saying it repeatedly. This is why they picked up stones to stone him.
That's the point that I'm making. Then why not just say I am God instead of saying before Abraham was I am? What was the purpose of it?
If I walk into a classroom and I give you a lecture, I take a check from the school, I give you books to read, I give you assignments, I grade your books or grade your assignments, I give you tests, and if you don't pass the test, I fail you, and if you or whatever, why don't I just explicitly say, I am your professor? Obey me. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
I walk into the room knowing that you're the teacher, unless I see somebody different.
Because I'm doing everything.
Teacher?
I'm doing everything that the teacher does. I'm the one that's put in authority. It's clear from everything that's going on. And so you're committing an exact word fallacy. You're saying, well, if Jesus doesn't say
teacher the same as a teacher,
you're committing the exact word fallacy. You're saying if Jesus doesn't explicitly say I'm God, then he didn't say that he's God. When there's like multiple.
No, I'm not saying that. I never. My thing is, my question is not that he needed to. My question is why didn't he just say that to discern any kind of contradiction across the board? Why didn't he just say it? If he was already saying it, why not? Why
So a skeptical New Testament scholar like Bart Ehrman will read John 8:58, and he might say, well, I don't necessarily believe this is historical, but this is clearly Jesus claiming to be God here. So I don't see why you need him to say.
Why did he use the word he claimed? Why didn't he just say he is God? Why did he have to affirm the claim by saying I can clearly see that he was claiming? Why didn't he just affirm it?
My guy, this is a terrible argument. I'm going to move on.
Can I?
Yeah,
Can
go
I?
ahead, Rob.
Oh wait, did he leave?
He left, yeah.
Oh, oh no. Okay.
It's bad. It's bad. You can respond. Go ahead, Rob.
All right.
The guy.
All right. I'm coming clear.
Yeah, you're good, man. I can hear you.
Oh, good. All right. I'm going to share my screen and show you my favorite way of getting at this. Because earlier in your Q&A, you were talking about how Mark is the first. So let's just go along with that. Like, let's just say, forget Matthew, Luke, and John. Let's just stick with Mark. I argue that Mark's Christology is even higher than John's. And people are like, I want to shock people with that because they're like, whoa, wait, what? How can you say Mark is higher? So by the time you reach, you know how you have Mark intercalation? So by the time you reach the end of the gospel, so the gospel starts with, this is the beginning of the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, and then the Son of God. It's like, especially if Mark is an anti-Roman gospel, then wait, the son of Zeus? Like, so keep that in mind, right? So then at the end, in the high priest situation, the high priest asked him a question that that gentleman was asking. Why can't he just make it clear? Stop beating around the bush. So the high priest stands up. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And not Matthew, not Luke, but Mark's version literally has, I am, ego I me. And then he juxtaposes Daniel 7 and Psalm 110, but he paraphrases the two verses. So Psalm 110 has, the Lord told my Lord, sit at my right hand. But Jesus takes the first Lord of Psalm 110 and says power. And then he takes the second Lord of Psalm 110 and shoves Son of Man from Daniel 7 into the second Lord of Psalm 110. So the Son of Man at the right hand of the power, and this is the whole two powers stuff.
Yeah.
And being the cloud rider. So then what was the priest's reaction?
Tears his clothes.
He tears his robes, or his clothes. Why do we still need witnesses? There's no court session over. We don't need to continue for another day or two. He's juxtaposed Psalm 110 with Daniel 7. You have heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict? All of them. All. Not some outlier dude that was like, no, he didn't really call himself the second power. All of them condemned him as deserving death. And so much so that if he's claiming to be God in flesh, right, what's the number one thing that the God of Israel can do? Have omniscience and hence predict the future, right? So notice the first thing they start doing is they blindfolded him, prophesy.
I never thought about that one before. That's good.
Yeah. So then by the time you reach the crucifixion, right? Now you as a Roman reader, you're like, whoa. So you as a Roman reader who's not a Jew ethnically, and hence, Mark has to translate Jewish ideas for a Gentile reader as a Roman, right? So Roman readers psychologically looking at the Jewish reactions to what Jesus is saying. And so then now it now comes back to, now how would a Roman reader psychologically, what would be the equivalent for a Roman reader? So the Jews have had their reaction, what would be the equivalent for a Roman reader? So when you come to the crucifixion, and the famous, he cries out, and the temple is torn, and the first person to utter faith happens to be the Roman centurion. And, so he's standing there. This man certainly was the son of, and then in his vernacular, it would be like the son of Zeus. Well, that would be blasphemy because the Caesars and that would contradict his polytheistic belief. Also, just a little quick. Okay, so that's my answer to the guy, but this is just between you and me and the Christians watching. In your own time, if you can, I'll give you a little bit of a nugget here. All the Gospels have Son of God in his reaction. Have you seen Luke's version?
It's the one where he says he's innocent? Or am I misremembering?
No. Well, sort of. So Luke 23. Luke does something very interesting. Down over here. Yeah. This man certainly was righteous, but this is a translation issue. It's literally the righteous one, and since Luke also wrote Acts, you'll see that same righteous one language used in Acts. Luke seems to be a fan of Isaiah 53 every time. So the righteous one, my righteous servant, language in Isaiah, Luke does like a midrash on that, even though it was Son of God, but he sort of shoves in Isaiah language, just to throw that in there to research in your own time. But yeah, anyway.
No, that's good, man.
God bless you, man. Keep up the good work. You're doing really cool stuff.
Cool, man. Yeah, no, you too, man. I appreciate it, and saw you in the chat and saw you pop up there, and I thought, why not? This could be funny with the guy, because it was just total exact word fallacy. Like, no, he's gotta like clearly say it for all times. There can never ever be confusion on it. It's just
it just comes down to like the perspicuous scripture. This is in anything in language. Like, let's just go to the first century and expect them to communicate the way you and I communicate.
Yeah,
it's so illogical.
Yeah, there's not a lot you could do with a guy like that. So yeah, it's bad. It's bad. Well, awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming up, Rob. Check out Sentinel Apologetics, guys. There's a lot of good stuff. And if you like, you've been doing a lot of debates with Muslims lately and stuff. And so if you like those kind of debates, check those out.
It doesn't mean I'm bored with Bible research. It's just, I think I've reached a threshold where I have now the tools to venture into religious comparisons, and obviously Islam being the big name of the game at the moment. I'm doing my own little Quran project where I'm laying out the Quran chronologically and then seeing the sort of the basal layer of the Quran as being a Syriac Christian origin sort of flavor that is then built on by, if it's Muhammad or some sort of cultic group in the Meccan context. So
yeah, no, it's good stuff, and I appreciate what you're doing with that. And so it's kind of cool to see everybody just suddenly kind of pile on with Islam lately. And so it's just been like you almost think it's God, because there's so many of them just doing it all at once. And I don't think it's like just because we all decided that would be really cool and get us a bunch of views, because it doesn't always necessarily translate to that. So well, awesome, man. I appreciate you stopping by. Thanks. Yeah. All right. Take care, Rob.
All right.
See ya. Yep. All right, guys. Again, check out Sentinel Apologetics. He's got a ton of really good resources. Good dude. And thank you guys so much for watching the stream. Again, hit the like and do all the things. And I appreciate you guys watching. I will try to do another one of these Thursday night. So I will see you then.